Charlotte Parker pressed both hands flat against the auctioneer's platform and said loudly enough for the whole square to hear, "That land has my father's grave on it. You will not sell it today." The gavel stopped midair. 40 people went silent. And Nathan Greer, the richest man in Dust Valley, smiled the slow smile of someone who had already won. He hadn't counted on the stranger at the back of the crowd. If that sentence just stopped your breath, subscribe to this channel, stay until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far Charlotte's story has traveled. The summer of 1882 came to Dust Valley the way bad news always did, loud, hot, and without mercy. The auction had been announced 3 weeks prior, nailed to the post outside the general store on a Thursday afternoon, when Charlotte was still 18 miles out on her property, trying to fix a stretch of fence line that had buckled under the weight of a dead oak. She didn't find out until Sunday, when she rode into town for flour and dried beans and saw the paper herself. She stood there on the boardwalk and read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into her coat pocket, rode home, and spent the entire night sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea that went cold before she touched it. The notice said the county had determined her property taxes were in arrears. 3 years of partial payments, each documented, each accompanied by a letter of explanation that she had written herself by lamplight at this same kitchen table, each mailed with the last of whatever she had in her tin box. The notice did not mention the letters. It did not mention that the shortfall amounted to $47.30, an amount so specific and so small that it felt almost like a joke. It said only that the Larkspur homestead, 212 acres deeded to one Charlotte Evelyn Parker in 1877, would be offered for public auction on the 14th of August, 1882, unless all outstanding amounts were settled in full by that date. She did not have $47.30. She had $11 a milk cow and a mule named Gerald, who had opinions about everything. So she went to the auction. She went because it was her land, because her father had worked it before her and broken his back and his heart doing it, and because she had buried him in the east field under the oak tree. She had planted herself the spring. She turned 17. She went because she did not know what else to do, and because sometimes a person goes to a thing they cannot stop just to bear witness to it, just to say, "I was here." I did not look away. She arrived early. She tied Gerald at the post near the water trough and straightened her dress, a plain brown calico she had mended in 4 places, and she walked into the square where the crowd had already gathered. It was a good crowd for Dust Valley. 40, maybe 50 people. Most of them she recognized. Most of them she had known her whole life. That was the part that sat heaviest on her chest. Not strangers. Not faceless men from the county seat with briefcases and cold eyes. These were people who had eaten at her father's table. People who had come to her mother's funeral. People who had bought eggs from Charlotte's basket every Saturday morning for 15 years and knew how she liked to walk home barefoot when the road was dry. They saw her come in. She watched them see her. There was that particular stillness that happens when a room notices something it is both drawn to and ashamed of, noticing a brief pause in the conversations, a quick glancing away, a few women tilting their heads together. Charlotte kept her chin up. She had practice. It was something you learned when you looked the way she did. When your body took up the kind of space that made people uncomfortable, when your hips and your belly and your arms were built, the way hers were soft and round and generous in ways that the corseted world of 1882 did not celebrate. You learned early how to enter a room as though you belonged in it, even when everything around you was quietly insisting that you didn't. You learned to walk like you had somewhere to be. You learned not to apologize for the room you required. She had learned it young. She had never finished learning it. Magistrate Delbert Finch was running the auction. He was a lean man with a mustache that he waxed into points and an expression of permanent mild disdain that he wore the way other men wore hats, automatically, unconsciously, as though he had simply forgotten to take it off. He stood on the temporary platform they'd erected in front of the land office and shuffled his papers and did not look at Charlotte when she positioned herself near the front of the crowd. But Nathan Greer did. Nathan Greer always looked. Howe was standing off to the side with 2 of his ranch hands, already wearing the expression of a man who considered the outcome settled. He was 61 years old. Nathan Greer built like an old wall, thick and solid and slightly crumbling at the edges, and he had wanted the Larkspur land since before Charlotte's father died. He wanted it for the creek that ran through the eastern third, the only reliable water source for 6 miles in any direction, and he had made offers twice that her father had refused, and once that she had refused, and each refusal had landed like a personal insult on a man who was not accustomed to being told no by people he did not consider his equals. He looked at Charlotte now, the way you look at something you've already decided is yours. She looked back. He smiled slow and thin and turned away. Magistrate Finch called the auction to order. He read out the property details, acreage, water rights, tax history, in the monotone of a man reciting information he considered already resolved. He named the opening bid. Charlotte knew what it would be before he said it. She had asked around quietly in the weeks before. She knew what the Larkspur was worth to Nathan Greer and what he would bid for it and how quickly it would be over. Opening bid, $200, Finch announced. Do I have 200? Nathan Greer raised his hand immediately. Not even a hesitation, like it was already done. 200 from Mr. Greer. Do I have 210? Silence. Charlotte felt the silence like a hand pressing down on her sternum. 200 going once. I'll bid. The voice came from behind her and to the left. It was a voice she had never heard before, low and unhurried with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need volume to carry. The whole crowd turned. Charlotte turned. Howe was standing at the edge of the square, half in shadow, with his hat pulled low and his hands at his sides in the deliberate stillness of a man who was very comfortable with people looking at him and was choosing not to find it remarkable. He was tall, genuinely tall, the kind that didn't try to make itself smaller with dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been in an argument once and come out the worse for it. He was wearing a coat that had seen real weather and boots that had walked real ground, and he was looking at Magistrate Finch with dark brown eyes that had something deeply unimpressed in them. 210, he said. Finch blinked. Yes. 210 from... He paused. And you are Wyatt Cole. Mr. Cole. Do you have business in Dust Valley? Mr. Cole. I do now, Wyatt said. Nathan Greer had gone very still. He had the expression of a man recalculating. Then his face smoothed into something that was almost pleasant. 225, he said. 250, Wyatt said. He hadn't moved. He was still just standing there, hands loose, watching Finch. Greer's jaw tightened. 300. A ripple went through the crowd. $300 was not a small number in Dust Valley in 1882. Charlotte watched Greer and felt something strange happening in her chest. Not hope exactly, because she had been very careful not to let herself hope, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt dangerous. 350, Wyatt said. Someone in the crowd sucked in a breath. Greer went red across the top of his cheeks. Who in the hell are you? He said, and there was nothing pleasant left in his voice. I told you, Wyatt said. Wyatt Cole. You don't have any stake in this property. I'm bidding on it, aren't I? Finch cleared his throat. Mr. Greer, do you have a counter? Greer stared at Wyatt Cole for a long moment. Then he said, 400. The square went quiet. $400. That was more than the land was worth on the open market. That was personal money, pride money, the kind of bid that stopped being about the land 3 bids ago. Charlotte felt something cold settle in her stomach. The stranger had pushed Greer too far. Men like Nathan Greer didn't lose gracefully, and they didn't forget who made them lose. She turned to find the stranger Wyatt Cole and discovered that he had moved. He was no longer at the edge of the crowd. He was standing 6 feet behind her, and his dark eyes weren't on Greer or on Finch. They were on her. She held his gaze. She wasn't sure why. She didn't know this man. She had no reason to trust the way he was looking at her. Not with pity. Not with the particular fascination that her body sometimes attracted from men who thought her size made her grateful for any attention, but with something that she couldn't immediately name. Something that felt like he was simply looking at her the way you look at something you are trying to understand. He tipped his hat. A small, deliberate motion. Then he turned back to Finch. 450. Someone in the crowd laughed a startled, slightly hysterical sound. Greer's ranch hands had moved closer to him, and one of them put a hand on his arm, and Greer shook it off hard. "Mr. Cole," Greer said, and now his voice had dropped to something quiet and specific. "You would do well to think very carefully about what you're doing here." "I am thinking carefully," Wyatt said. 450 stands. Greer looked at him, looked at Charlotte, looked back at him. "Fine," he said quietly. "Fine." And then he turned and walked out of the square, his men following behind him, and the crowd parted for him like water, and he did not look at Charlotte at all as he left. Finch hammered the gavel like he was glad to have something definitive to do. "Sold. $450 to Mr. Wyatt Cole." Charlotte stood very still for a moment. The crowd was moving, talking, filling the space where the silence had been. She could hear her own heartbeat. The land was still sold. She needed to be clear about that. The land was still gone from her. It had transferred from one man's hands to another man's hands, and the fact that the second man had held Nathan Greer's price up long enough to make him walk away did not change the fundamental nature of the situation. It did not give her back the $47.30. It did not give her back the deed. She started walking toward the land office. She would need to speak to Finch. She would need to know how long she had before the property formally transferred, what her rights were as the current occupant, whether there was any Miss Parker. She stopped, turned. Wyatt Cole was 3 feet away, holding his hat in both hands. Up close, he was different than she'd expected, younger than the gray at his temples suggested, and with something tired around the eyes that the distance had hidden. He had clearly been traveling for some time. Dust on his coat that wasn't from Dust Valley's square. "You know my name," she said. "Heard it from the papers in the land office. Went in and asked before the auction started." He paused. "I apologize. That probably sounds worse than I meant it." "It sounds like you'd planned to be here." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. "Why?" "Because the notice was posted wrong," he said. "The taxes on your property, the county recorded a payment you made in November of 1880 against a different parcel number. Clerical error. Common enough, but it means your account shows a balance that ain't correct by $17.60. Charlotte stared at him. "What?" "Which means even without the correction, your actual arrearage was under $30, which falls below the county threshold for forced auction." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "This is a copy of the original payment receipt with the correct parcel designation. The one in the county file has a transposed number 3 digits off. Easy mistake. But it changes things." She took the paper. She looked at it. She looked at him. "How did you find this?" "I work with a land title company out of Denver. It's what I do. Review titles, check filings, find errors." He put his hat back on his head. "I rode through Dust Valley 6 months ago on other business and saw the situation with your property. I sent a letter to the county clerk's office in February." They never responded. "No, ma'am, they didn't." Something moved in his expression, a controlled kind of anger, the kind that had been sitting long enough to become something quieter. "I came in person because the auction date was approaching and no correction had been made." Charlotte looked back at the paper. Then at the land office where Finch had retreated, the sound of his congratulatory conversation drifting through the open door. Then at the square which was emptying, now people drifting back to their ordinaries. The drama concluded. None of them were looking at her. None of them were particularly troubled by what had just happened. "The auction is already concluded," she said. "The auction is already concluded," he agreed. "But the grounds for the auction were improper. You have legal standing to challenge it." "Mr. Cole." She folded the paper carefully. "I have $11 a cow and a mule. I don't have what it costs to challenge a county auction." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I paid $450 this morning." "I know. I'd like that money back eventually. I'm not a wealthy man." He said it matter-of-factly without apology. "But the error exists, and it's documented, and if you're willing to fight it through the proper channels, I'll help you. At no charge for my time." Charlotte studied him. 25 years of being Charlotte Parker had taught her a great deal about men who offered things, and what they tended to want in return. She had learned to recognize the particular calibration of a man who thought that her loneliness, or her size, or her difficult situation made her a good target for a certain kind of kindness that wasn't kindness at all. She did not see that in Wyatt Cole's face. What she saw was more complicated and in some ways harder to deal with. She saw a man who had ridden a significant distance to fix a problem that was not his problem. A man who had spent money he did not have in surplus to prevent an outcome that hadn't benefited him. A man who was standing in front of her without performance, without charm, without the particular theatrics that tended to accompany offers from men who expected something back. She didn't know what to do with that. "Why?" she said again. He thought about it. Actually thought about it, which was not what she expected. "Because the county filed wrong records and a woman lost land she shouldn't have lost and nobody did anything about it for 6 months, he said finally. "That bothers me." "It bothers you?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at the paper again. She looked at Nathan Greer's retreating figure, now visible down the main street, climbing into his wagon with a rigid back and a turned-away jaw. She thought about the fence line on her eastern property, the one she'd been trying to fix for 3 weeks. She thought about Gerald the mule standing at the water trough, deeply unimpressed by everything. "I have a spare room," she said. "If you intend to stay in Dust Valley long enough to see this through, it's better than the hotel. The hotel has mice." He almost smiled. It was the barest thing, a slight pull at the corner of his mouth that didn't quite commit to being a real expression, but she caught it. "I appreciate it," he said. "I'll pay for room and board." "You'll work for it," she said. "I have fence line down and a water trough that's rotting at the corner post and a barn door that won't shut properly." "I can do fence line," he said. "I know you can," she said. "I saw the calluses on your hands." That surprised him. She could see it, the small adjustment in how he was looking at her, the recalibration that happened when he realized she had been observing him as carefully as he'd been observing her. Men tended to be surprised when they discovered that. She turned toward the land office. "I'll speak to Finch today about the documentation. I want everything in writing before that deed changes hands on paper." "He won't be cooperative," Wyatt said, falling into step beside her without being invited, which she noted but did not object to. "He never is," Charlotte said. "But he's also not especially brave. Finch does what Nathan Greer wants because Nathan Greer has money, and Finch wants to keep his position, not because he has strong feelings either way. If we can demonstrate that proceeding puts the county at legal risk, he'll hesitate." Wyatt was quiet for 2 steps. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about very little else for 3 weeks, she said. "You knew about the tax error." "I knew something was wrong with the numbers. I didn't have a copy of the original receipt with the parcel transcription." She glanced at him. "Where did you get that?" "County Clerk's Archive in Denver. The receipt your father mailed in 1880 was filed at the Denver office first before transfer. The local copy has the transposed number. The Denver copy has the correct one." Charlotte stopped walking. She stood in front of the land office door for a moment and pressed her hand flat against the warm wood and breathed. Her father's handwriting was on the back of that receipt. She hadn't seen his handwriting in 4 years. "All right," she said. She kept her voice steady. "Thank you." She pushed the door open. Delbert Finch was not a bad man. That was the honest assessment, and Charlotte had always tried to be honest, even when it was inconvenient. "I was a man of middling courage and significant self-interest, which was a combination that tended to produce a particular sort of harm. The harm of inaction, of looking the other way, of doing what was easiest, while telling himself it wasn't his fault how things fell out." He looked up when she came in. Then he looked at Wyatt Cole behind her, and something uncomfortable moved through his face. "Miss Parker," he said, "I'm sorry for how this morning went. The county doesn't take these actions lightly." "You have an error in the tax record," Charlotte said. She laid the paper on his desk. "This is the original payment receipt from November 1880, filed at the Denver County Clerk's office. Your parcel number for this payment is incorrect by a transposition of 3 digits. When this payment is correctly applied, my outstanding balance falls below the mandatory threshold for forced auction proceedings." Finch stared at the paper. His hands moved toward it, then stopped. "This auction was improperly initiated. Wyatt said from behind Charlotte. His voice hadn't changed, still that same level, unhurried tone as though he was discussing the weather. The documentation supports it, and we have copies of the original. I'd suggest you speak with the county legal office before that deed transfers. Finch picked up the paper. His eyes moved across it. Where did you? Denver Archive, Wyatt said. They were very helpful. Finch set the paper down. He looked at Charlotte in a way that was complicated, part discomfort, part something she recognized as guilt, the genuine kind that a person gets when they realize they have participated in something they shouldn't have. Miss Parker, he said, I'll need to review this with the county attorney. Of course, Charlotte said. I'd expect nothing less. In the meantime, I'd ask that the deed transfer be suspended pending that review. A pause. Yes. That's within my authority. He said it like a man discovering that authority he possessed had inconveniently landed in his hands. I'll send a message to the county attorney today. I appreciate it, Charlotte said. She picked up her copy of the paper, turned, and walked back out into the summer air. Wyatt fell into step beside her again. They walked in silence for a moment. That went better than expected, he said. Finch isn't the problem, Charlotte said. Finch will do what's legally required if it's put in front of him clearly enough. He doesn't have the stomach for anything more. She paused. Nathan Greer is the problem. Yes, ma'am. I'd reckon so. She glanced at him sideways. Do you know who Nathan Greer is? I know he has a great deal of influence in this county, a reputation for acquiring land by methods that don't always bear close examination, and that 3 properties he holds were previously owned by single women. He said this with that same flat precision. I looked into the local history before I came. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. How long did you plan this? I don't think of it as planning so much as preparation, he said. I don't like going into things I don't understand. Neither do I, she said. They had reached Gerald, who was still at the water trough and had the deeply suffering expression of a mule who had been waiting an unreasonable amount of time and was not going to pretend otherwise. Charlotte untied him and gave him a scratch between his ears, which he accepted with the dignity of a creature granting a significant concession. We'll need to get my horse, Wyatt said. He's at the livery. There's decent grazing at the property, Charlotte said. The stable's small but sound. She paused. The fence line on the east side is a serious project. That section alone is going to take the better part of a week. Then we should start tomorrow, Wyatt said. We should start this afternoon, Charlotte said. Daylight's wasting. She heard that not quite smile in his voice when he answered. Yes, ma'am. The ride back to the Larkspur was 14 miles, and Wyatt Cole spent most of it quiet in a way that Charlotte recognized as the comfortable kind, the quiet of someone who wasn't filling silence because he was nervous, but simply because he didn't have anything that needed saying. Charlotte was the same way. They had spent enough time in the world to know that speech was not the same thing as substance. What she did notice in the peripheral way, you notice things about a person when you are in close proximity and not yet ready to look directly at them. He rode well. He sat in the saddle, the way you sit when horses have been your primary transportation for a very long time, loose and economical, without performance. His horse was a bay gelding, with a white blaze, that had clearly been well kept, not pretty, but solid, the kind of horse chosen by a man who needed the animal to work rather than to impress. She noticed the way he surveyed the land as they rode. The particular attention of a man who had spent time reading land, looking at grade and drainage, and the lines of fence posts, assessing without making a show of assessing. She noticed that when they passed the section of road that ran along the Greer property boundary, where the Greer fence line was new and tight and made a point of its own health by contrast. Wyatt didn't look at it with any particular emotion. He just noted it, filed it, moved on. She had expected him to make more conversation about the situation. Most people, once they'd established some kind of alliance, had a tendency to analyze it, to review the morning's events, to discuss strategy in a way that was at least partly about reassurance, assuring themselves they'd made the right choices, assuring their new ally that they were capable. Wyatt didn't do that. He seemed to have made his assessment of the situation and was now simply proceeding, and there was something so quietly competent about it that Charlotte found it more unsettling than she would have found elaborate reassurance. She was not used to being unsettled by competence. She possessed a fair amount of it herself. They reached the Larkspur as the afternoon was tipping toward its long-shadowed half. Charlotte pulled Gerald up at the water trough by the barn and let him drink his fill while she looked at the place, the way she always looked at it when she came home. Not with sentimentality exactly, but with the particular attention of a woman who needed to know the current state of everything she was responsible for. The house was small and weathered, but sound. The barn was in good repair. The garden was producing. The trouble was, the eastern fence line, 140 feet of cedar posts and barbed wire, that a late winter storm had compromised in 6 places, leaving gaps that the neighboring land, now nominally Nathan Greer's until the legal matter was settled, could exploit for cattle encroachment. "That's the trouble area," she said, indicating with a tilt of her head. Wyatt looked. He was quiet for a moment, doing that assessment thing. "What did the storm take out?" 3 posts are down. 2 more are leaning enough that they won't hold tension through the summer. The wire itself is intact in most sections, but there are 2 places where it snapped. "You have wire." "Half a roll. I have the tools." "That's enough for most of it," he said. "I'll need to check the post depth on the ones still standing before I know how many new ones we're digging. Hardware store in town has posts. I have an account there." He nodded. He seemed satisfied with the logistics in the brisk way of someone who likes having a problem laid out concretely, who finds solid work clarifying rather than burdensome. They put the horses up. Charlotte showed him the spare room, her father's old room, which she had kept spare partly because it felt right to leave it, and partly because she'd been holding on to some practical hope that she might need it for a hired hand one day. It was clean and plain, and had a decent mattress and a window that faced east. He looked around it without comment. Then he said, "Thank you." "Supper's at 6, Charlotte said. "Can you cook?" "Some. I'll cook tonight. You'll take a turn tomorrow." "Fair," he said. She left him to settle in and went to start supper, and she stood at her stove and looked out the small window over the garden and tried to process what had happened today in some kind of orderly fashion, because her mind needed order when things went sideways. What she knew. A stranger had come to her auction and outbid Nathan Greer. This stranger had documentation that suggested the auction had been improper. He had offered to help her challenge it. He was now sleeping in her father's room. What she didn't know, everything else. She put a pot on to boil. She cut the potatoes and the onions and the leftover salt pork with the automatic efficiency of a woman who had been feeding herself alone for 4 years and had learned to do it without thinking. And she thought about Wyatt Cole, who had driven 6 months of preparation and a $450 bid and a half-day's quiet ride on the evidence of a clerical error he had found in a county archive, and who had said when she asked him why that it bothered him. She was 31 years old. She had been bothering people for 31 years. Not one person in 31 years had ridden any kind of distance to do anything about it. She put the lid on the pot and went to wash her hands and tried to do something useful with the feeling sitting in her chest, which was somewhere in the vicinity of terrifying. He came to supper with clean hands and his hat off, and he sat where she pointed and said, "Thank you," when she put the plate down, and he ate like a man who was genuinely hungry rather than performing appreciation, and for a while they ate in companionable silence. Then he said, "How long have you been working this place alone?" 4 years, she said. "Since my father died." "He teach you the land work?" "He taught me everything," Charlotte said. "My father believed firmly that there was no task a person couldn't learn if they were willing to be bad at it first." She paused. "My mother had similar views. She passed too. Before him. I was 19. She ate a bite of potato. "They were from good people." "Sounds like," he said. "You," she said. "You have family." I was quiet for a moment, not the comfortable quiet from the ride, but a different kind. "A brother," he said. "In Texas. We don't correspond much." She noted this and did not press it. "You've been doing this land title work long," she said. 8 years. He turned his fork over once on the plate. "Before that ranch work, before that things I don't particularly recommend." "War." He looked at her. "The calluses aren't all from fence posts," she said. "And you carry yourself like a man who spent a long time in a situation where he had to know where everyone in the room was." He studied her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry." "Sorry," she said. She meant it simply. "It was a long time ago," he said. She nodded and did not require anything further, because she understood that some things were a long time ago in years only, and that the understanding was different from the feeling, and that a man who had learned to keep track of everyone in the room had his reasons that were his own. They ate the rest of the meal quietly, and when Charlotte cleared the plates, she said, "I'm planning to ride out to the east fence line tomorrow at first light. You're welcome to come." "I'll come," he said. "Bring the tools," she said. "We'll take Gerald for the post hauling. He's strong when he decides to cooperate." "What makes him decide carrots?" Charlotte said. "He's got clear priorities." "Most honest quality in a mule," Wyatt said, and this time the smile made it all the way. Charlotte rinsed the plates and put them on the rack and looked out her kitchen window at the evening settling dark over the fence line that needed fixing, and thought about $47.30, and how strange it was that the smallest sums could determine the largest things. Thought about Nathan Greer's face when he'd finally understood he wasn't going to win the auction, and the particular quality of that silence, the silence of a man who was not finished. She thought about her father's handwriting on a receipt in Denver. She thought about Wyatt Cole, sitting at her table in the easy silence of a man who was accustomed to solitude and had not yet decided whether he minded company. She dried her hands. She went to check the lock on the door. Tomorrow there was fence work to do. There was legal work to do. There was Nathan Greer to contend with, and Delbert Finch to monitor, and a county attorney who had not yet been contacted. But tonight, the larkspur was still hers. The land still lay outside her window, dark and summer warm and smelling of dry grass and the faint sweetness of the clover she'd planted along the fence to keep the soil from washing. Tonight, her father's old room had someone in it, and the fence line would hold until morning, and Gerald was settled in his stall with his hay and his considerable opinions. She stood at the window a moment longer. Then she went to bed, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she slept. The first morning on the larkspur started before the sun did. Charlotte was already at the stove when Wyatt came out of her father's room, boots in hand, moving with the quiet of a man who had spent years learning how not to wake people. He stopped when he saw the lamp lit and the coffee on, and Charlotte at the counter with her hair pinned back and her work coat already on. "You said first light," he said. "I said first light," she agreed. "Sit down. Coffee's ready." He sat. She poured. He took the cup in both hands and drank without commentary, and she noted with approval that he was not the kind of man who needed to talk in the morning to establish that he was awake. She had known men who talked in the morning. It was a habit she had never warmed to. She put bread and cold butter on the table and sat across from him with her own cup. "I went through the fence diagrams last night," she said. "I think the third post from the creek bend is worse than I thought. We may need to dig a new hole rather than try to reset it." "How deep is the frost line out here?" 24 inches in a hard winter. This summer's been dry, so the ground should cooperate." "We'll probe it first," he said. "If the post base is rotted, we pull it. If it's just heaved, we can reset it and pack it tight." "That's my read too," she said. He looked up from his coffee. She caught something in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a quiet recalibration. The look of a man who had expected to be doing more explaining and was finding he didn't need to. "You've done this before," he said. "My father and I rebuilt the entire North Line the summer I was 22, she said. "It took 6 weeks. I learned to hate barbed wire and respect it simultaneously." "Only way to feel about barbed wire," he said. They finished breakfast and loaded the tools onto Gerald, who accepted this imposition with the philosophical resignation of a creature who had been through worse. The fence line was a 40-minute walk east, and they went on foot because the terrain near the creek was rough for horses, and Gerald was better on the pull than any horse she'd owned. The morning was already warm, the kind of August heat that had weight to it, that sat on your shoulders like something considering how serious to get. Charlotte felt it and ignored it the way she had learned to ignore most things that were uncomfortable and couldn't be changed. The fence was worse than she'd described it. She knew that when she said it the previous evening. She had been managing her own expectations about the scope of the job for 2 weeks, describing it as slightly better than it was, so that she didn't lie awake, cataloging disaster. But now, standing at the east section, with the creek visible through the gap in the third post, and the wire lying coiled and useless in the summer grass, she let herself see it straight. 6 posts. 3 downed, 2 seriously compromised, 1 marginal. 2 sections of wire snapped, 1 that would need to be retensioned even after the posts were restored. This was a week's work minimum, possibly 10 days. Wyatt walked the line without speaking, going all the way to the creek bend and back, crouching at each post, and testing, and moving on. When he came back, he said, "Post 4 is the worst. The base is gone. We're digging a new hole." "I know," she said. "You want to start there." "I want to start at post 1 and work east so we don't have to backtrack with Gerald," she said. "But yes, post 4 is where we lose half a day." He picked up the spade. "Then let's not waste the morning." They worked. Charlotte had worked beside men before her father, the occasional hired hand in the years when the money stretched far enough for one, and she had always paid attention to how a man worked when he thought no one was grading him. Some men performed labor the way they performed everything else, with an audience-in-mind efficiency, sacrifice to appearance. Some men worked in bursts, hard for 20 minutes, and then slow for 10, unable to sustain a pace. Her father had been a steady worker, methodical and unhurried, the kind of man who could work 8 hours and look the same at the end as he had at the beginning. Wyatt Cole worked like her father. He didn't rush. He didn't slow down. He moved through each task with the complete attention of a man who found the work itself sufficient reason to do it well, and he didn't talk while he was doing it, except when there was something useful to say. And when Charlotte said something useful, he listened and responded, and then went back to the task without making a production of the exchange. By mid-morning, they had reset post 1 and post 2 and probed post 3, which turned out to be salvageable with packing, and were beginning the excavation for post 4. When Charlotte heard it, the particular sound of horses on the road north of the fence line. More than one horse, moving with intention. She straightened up and turned, and beside her, Wyatt had already stopped working, already turned, already had his hand near his coat in the automatic way of a man who had once needed to be ready. 3 riders. Nathan Greer in the center, his 2 ranch hands flanking him like punctuation, moving along the road at a pace that was too slow to be passing through. Greer pulled up at the fence line and looked down at them from his horse. "Morning, Miss Parker," he said. He said it pleasantly, which was worse than if he'd said it any other way. "Mr. Greer," she said. His eyes went to Wyatt. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Yesterday you were bidding faster than I could get your name." "Wyatt Cole," Wyatt said. He didn't move from where he was standing, spade still in his hand, looking up at Greer with the same flat attention he seemed to bring to everything. "Mr. Cole." Greer's smile stayed fixed the way smiles do when they're not connected to anything warm underneath them. "You're aware, I assume, that you purchased land that is currently occupied." "I'm aware," Wyatt said. "Miss Parker has until the 1st of September to vacate according to the auction terms." Charlotte felt the sentence land in her chest like a stone into water spreading out in circles. "The 1st of September. 23 days. There's a documentation issue being reviewed by the county attorney," Wyatt said. "The deed transfer is suspended pending that review." The pleasantness in Greer's face didn't change, which told Charlotte everything he already knew. Finch had told him, or one of Finch's people had told him, and he had come here not because this was news, but because he wanted to see their faces when they realized he knew. "Yes," Greer said. "I heard about that. Some confusion over parcel numbers." He let the pause sit. "I have a county attorney of my own, Mr. Cole, and I have a deed signed and witnessed and properly filed this very morning. These things have a way of getting resolved." "They do," Wyatt said. "One way or another." Greer looked at him for a moment, the specific look of a man who is reassessing something and not finding the reassessment comfortable. Then he looked at Charlotte. "Miss Parker," he said, and something changed in his voice. Not the pleasantness that stayed, but something below it shifted, became specific and personal and ugly. "You've always been a stubborn woman. I respected that once. But you need to think carefully about what you're doing. Bringing in outside men to complicate a legal matter doesn't make the matter go away. It just makes more trouble for everyone involved. Is that a threat, Mr. Greer? Charlotte said. It's advice, he said, from a neighbor. We haven't been neighbors for some time, Charlotte said. Not since you cut off the water access to my south grazing and claimed it was a property line adjustment. His jaw tightened. That had landed. Good. Good day, Miss Parker, he said. Mr. Cole. He turned his horse and the hands turned with him, and they rode back the way they'd come, and Charlotte stood and watched them go, and felt the particular cold of something that had been confirmed. Wyatt was quiet for the moment after the hoofbeats faded. Then he said, He filed the deed this morning. I heard. That means Finch either didn't suspend the transfer or suspended it, and Greer went around him. He dug the spade into the ground beside post 4. Either way, we have less time than I thought. How much less? If the deed is filed, and the county attorney rules the documentation insufficient to challenge you, could be looking at a judgment within 2 weeks. He paused. I need to ride to Denver. Charlotte looked at him. Denver. I need the original documentation in hand, not copies. And I need to speak to the land title attorney I work with before Greer's people get to the county record office. He met her eyes. I can be there and back in 5 days if I ride hard. 5 days. Charlotte looked at the fence line. Looked at the gap where post 4 needed to go, the wire curled in the grass, the creek visible through the gap, the Greer land on the other side of the water. Go, she said. I'll work the fence while you're gone. Charlotte. It was the first time he had used her name without the honorific, and they both noticed it. He stopped. She felt the moment settle. I'll be fine, she said. I've been working this land alone for 4 years. 5 more days won't end me. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that he didn't quite finish expressing, and she didn't press him on it because she recognized it. The frustration of a person who wants to stay and knows they need to go, who is looking for a way to do both and can't find it. I'll leave first thing tomorrow, he said. Leave today, she said. The light's good. Get a head start. He was quiet. The fence will be here when you get back, she said. Go. He went back to digging. She understood then that he wasn't going to argue about it, and that he wasn't going to make her convince him, and that they were simply going to finish what they'd started this morning before he left, because that was the kind of man he was, the kind who finished what he started. They worked until noon without speaking. It was the most comfortable silence Charlotte had spent with another person in 4 years. That was when she understood she was in trouble. He rode out at 3 in the afternoon after they'd eaten, and he'd helped her move the reset posts into position for setting, and he'd given her a 3-minute summary of what the legal situation required that was so precise and unadorned that she could have repeated it back verbatim, and then he'd said, I'll be back before the 6th, and gotten on the bay gelding and gone. Charlotte watched him ride out from the porch. Gerald stood beside her doing the same because Gerald considered himself a person and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Don't, she said to Gerald. Gerald's ear flicked. He's going to handle legal matters, she said. That is the entirety of what's happening. Gerald made a sound that was deeply unconvinced. She went back to work. The 5 days without Wyatt Cole were instructive in ways that Charlotte was not particularly grateful for. The fence work was hard, and she did it anyway, 2 sections a day, with Gerald's help working from first light to the point where the light went too flat for safe handling of wire and posts. Her hands got worse than they already were. 2 broken blisters on the right hand, a wire cut on her left forearm that she cleaned and wrapped and ignored, and by the 3rd day she was moving stiffly in the mornings, but she was moving, and that was the point. On the 2nd day, one of Greer's ranch hands rode along the fence line twice, slowly watching her work. He didn't stop. He didn't speak. He just rode by and looked, and she looked back, and that was the whole of it. But she noticed it the way you notice something that is meant to be noticed. A reminder that she was being observed, that Greer was watching, that the situation had not resolved itself simply because she'd gone back to work. On the 3rd day, May Whitfield came by. May was 64 years old, and had been in Dust Valley longer than most of the current buildings, and she ran the dry goods store on Main Street with the particular authority of a woman who had survived enough of life's large inconveniences to find its small ones interesting. She had known Charlotte's mother. She had brought food to Charlotte's door the week her father died. She was one of maybe 3 people in Dust Valley that Charlotte considered loosely and carefully something like a friend. She pulled up in her wagon and climbed down with a basket, and Charlotte came off the porch to meet her. "People are talking," May said by way of greeting. "They always are," Charlotte said. "They're talking about a man sleeping in your house." "A man is staying in my spare room and working on my fence line and assisting with a legal matter," Charlotte said. "He left 3 days ago for Denver." "Denver," May said. She had the look of someone collecting information for later assembly. "Is he the one who bid at the auction?" "He is." May set her basket down on the porch step and looked at Charlotte in the particular way of a woman who has seen enough of life to be interested rather than scandalized. "He's a good-looking man?" she said. "I hadn't particularly noticed," Charlotte said. May's expression communicated that this was the least convincing thing she'd heard this week. "It's a legal matter," Charlotte said. "There's a clerical error in the county tax records that made the auction improper. Wyatt Mr. Cole works in land titles and found the error. He's helping me contest the sale." "And he's doing this for free," May said. "He's doing it because the error exists and he found it, and it bothers him that nobody corrected it," Charlotte said. May was quiet for a moment. "Charlotte," she said, and her voice changed softer. The May voice that only came out on serious occasions. "Greer was in the store yesterday." Charlotte felt the shift and held still. "I was asking after you," May said. "Not asking after you the way you ask after a neighbor. The other kind. The kind where a man is calculating something and he wants information." She paused. "He asked if I knew anything about the man who'd bid at the auction, whether he'd been in town before, whether anyone knew who he was." "What did you tell him?" "That I didn't know anything about it and hadn't been paying attention," May said. "Which is the most useful kind of lie, because nobody believes it." Charlotte felt something cold work its way down her spine. Greer wasn't asking idle questions. He was building something, assembling pieces, looking for angles. That was how he worked. Her father had described it once. Nathan Greer doesn't come at a problem from the front. He works the edges until there aren't any left. "He's going to do something," Charlotte said. "He's already doing something," May said. "He stopped in at the bank yesterday morning and spent an hour with Hollis Crane." Hollis Crane was the manager of the Dust Valley Savings and Loan, and Charlotte had an account there, and her breathing went careful and measured while she thought through what that meant. "My note on the barn," she said. "I have an outstanding note on the barn renovation I did in '80. "For how much?" $80. I've been paying it quarterly. I'm current through June. "September payment is due when?" Charlotte looked at May. "September 1st. Same day as the vacate deadline." The same day. It was not a coincidence. Nathan Greer had done his accounting before she'd done hers, and he had seen this particular collision coming, and he had been in the bank before sunrise yesterday to make sure that Hollis Crane understood how the numbers lined up. "He's going to call the note," Charlotte said. "I don't know that," May said. "But you think it." May picked up her basket and handed it to Charlotte. It had biscuits in it, and a jar of apple butter, and a piece of ham wrapped in cloth, and Charlotte received these things with hands that were steadier than she felt. "I think Nathan Greer has a lot of money, and a county attorney, and a deed that's already filed," May said. "And I think you need more than a legal argument." She paused. "I think you need to know who your people are." Char looked at her. "This town has known you your whole life," May said. "That cuts both ways. But there are people here who knew your father and know what he built and know what Nathan Greer is." Her voice had gone quiet and precise. "Let me talk to some of them." Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it. She had spent her adult life not asking for help. Not because she was too proud to receive it. She had examined that question carefully over the years, and she didn't think it was pride exactly, but because she had learned that the asking came with costs. With obligations, with the particular debt of gratitude that a woman in her position couldn't always afford, with the way help from certain people, came with a side portion of pity that was harder to swallow than the difficulty itself. But May Whitfield was not that kind of help. "All right," Charlotte said. May nodded once satisfied. "Good. Now tell me exactly what you need." Charlotte told her. All of it, the parcel number error, the original receipt, Wyatt Cole and the Denver archive, and the suspended deed transfer, the 5-day timeline. May listened without interrupting, which was one of her most formidable qualities, and when Charlotte finished, May sat for a moment and then said, "Howard Pratt." Charlotte blinked. "Howard Pratt is Greer's attorney's brother-in-law." "Hi is," May said. "And he's also never forgiven Nathan Greer for the business with the Morrison water rights in '77 because 2 of Howard's cattle died that summer when Greer diverted the South Creek." She paused. "People remember water." "Howard Pratt won't help me out of the goodness of his heart." "No," May said. "But he'll help because making Greer lose something costs him nothing and satisfies a grudge he's been carrying for 5 years." She stood up. "I'll call on him tomorrow." She left, and Charlotte watched her go, and then she went inside and sat at her father's desk and looked at the papers she'd been assembling. Her own copies of the tax records, the payment receipts she'd kept in a tin box under the floorboard, the letter she'd written to the county clerk in February that had never been answered. She spread them out on the desk. She looked at them for a long time, her father's handwriting on the oldest receipts. The same careful, slightly cramped script that she could still see. When she closed her eyes, could still hear attached to a voice that had read her weather almanacs at bedtime because it was what they had for books. She picked up a pen and began to write. If she was going to walk into a county attorney's office and make a legal argument, she was going to walk in with every document organized and tabbed and ready to be produced on demand. She was going to know the contents of each one cold. She was going to be the most prepared person in any room this situation put her in, because she was a plus-size woman from a small ranch with $11 and a mule, and the only advantage she had was that she was not Nathan Greer, and Greer had made the mistake that powerful men always made. He had looked at her and seen something he could dismiss. Wyatt came back on the 5th day. Charlotte was at the east fence line when she heard the bay gelding. She'd learned the particular rhythm of his gait in a single day. Apparently, which was the kind of thing you found out about yourself under conditions you didn't design. And she straightened up from the wire she was tensioning and watched him ride toward her and made her face do something neutral. He pulled up and dismounted in one motion and tied off the horse and came to where she was standing, and the first thing she noticed was that he had a leather satchel across his shoulder that she hadn't seen when he left. "I got it," he said. "The original documentation. The original filing from Denver with the correct parcel designation witnessed by the Denver County Clerk and stamped." He reached into the satchel and produced a folder. "I also got a notarized statement from the Denver Records Office confirming the discrepancy between their copy and the local copy." He paused. "And I spoke to my attorney. He believes the case is strong." Charlotte took the folder. She opened it. She looked at the documents, the stamps, the signatures, the notation in the Denver clerk's hand, the unmistakable authority of paper that had been properly handled and properly witnessed. Then she looked at her own handwriting on the entry she'd made in her father's receipt book the night he paid that tax bill, the careful record-keeping of a man who had believed documentation was a form of dignity. She closed the folder. "Greer is going to move on my banknote," she said. "September 1st. Same day as the vacate deadline." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "How much?" $80. I'm current, but September's coming. I can cover the September payment." "No," she said. "Charlotte." "No," she said again, and she said it in the voice that was not negotiable, the voice that didn't require volume, because it had something else underneath it. "I am not taking money from you. We are addressing the legal matter together because you found the error, and I have standing to contest the sale. That is a partnership. Taking money is something else." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him working through something, could see the shape of what he wanted to say, and the recognition that it wasn't his place to say it yet. "All right," he said. "May Whitfield may have found us a witness," Charlotte said. "Howard Pratt. He has history with Greer over water rights. She's meeting with him tomorrow." "Howard Pratt." Wyatt repeated it with the sound of a man filing a fact. "Does he have standing in court?" He has documentation of the 1877 water diversion. It's not directly related to our case, but it establishes a pattern of behavior. She looked at him. You said your attorney thinks the case is strong. He does. But strong and one are two different things, and Greer has more resources. I know, she said. He's going to put up a real fight. I know that too, Charlotte said. He's been putting up this particular fight for 6 years since my father first turned down his offer. She looked out across the fence line. 3 sections now complete the posts, firm the wire tight. But I've been standing in front of it for 6 years. I know the shape of it. Wyatt was quiet. She could feel him looking at her, the way he'd looked at her in the auction square, that careful, unhurried attention that she still didn't entirely know what to do with. The fence looks good, he said finally. I worked, she said. I can see that. A pause. You cut your arm. Wire, it's fine. Let me look at it. Wyatt. You can argue with me about the money, he said. The arm is not a hill worth dying on. She held out her left arm. He unwrapped the bandage she'd put on 3 days ago and examined the cut, which was healing, but could have done with better attention at the time, and his hands were careful in the specific way of a person who has done field medicine before, who knows how to handle something that hurts without making it hurt worse. He rewrapped it with a piece of clean cloth from his saddlebag. His hands were still and steady, and he didn't make a performance of the care. Thank you, Charlotte said. You're welcome, he said. He stepped back. Now tell me what Howard Pratt knows and what we need him to say. The county attorney's office was in a brick building on the east end of Main Street, and Charlotte walked into it on the morning of August 23rd, with the satchel over her shoulder, Wyatt beside her, and Howard Pratt behind them. Howard Pratt was 62 and dry as a fence post, and had a specific quality of anger that had been stored very carefully for 5 years, and was now quite pleased to have a productive outlet. He had said when May brought Charlotte to his door that he would do what he could, which turned out to mean he had his own documentation, his own witnesses, and a county map with annotations that told the story of Nathan Greer's property acquisitions over 15 years in a way that was difficult to misread. The county attorney was a young man named Del Forsyth, who had been in the position for 8 months and had not yet had occasion to understand who Nathan Greer was in the specific way that experience tended to teach. Charlotte put the documents on his desk. The Denver certification, the receipt with the correct parcel number, the notarized discrepancy statement, the chain of her payments, every one, every letter, every record she had kept in the tin box under the floorboard. She put Howard Pratt's documentation beside it. She watched Del Forsyth's face as he read. He read for a long time. Then he looked up. The auction was improper, he said. It came out like something he was trying to convince himself he was saying correctly. Yes, Charlotte said. The grounds for the forced auction did not meet the mandatory threshold. Miss Parker. He paused, looked at the documents again. The deed is filed. The deed can be vacated if the sale is ruled improper, Wyatt said. You have the authority. Mr. Greer has a great deal of influence in this county, Charlotte said. I understand that, but he does not have influence over what these documents say, and what they say is that a woman's land was auctioned on incorrect records. She held Del Forsyth's gaze. You're new here. That works in your favor right now because you have not yet had occasion to be indebted to Nathan Greer. Whatever he offers you to make this go away, whatever he suggests is in your interest. I want you to think about whether this is the kind of lawyer you intended to be when you took the bar. Forsyth stared at her. He was young enough that she could still see the person he'd planned to be underneath the person this county might make him. I'll need to review the documentation, he said. Of course, Charlotte said. We'll wait. Nathan Greer arrived at the county attorney's office at 11:20. Charlotte heard him before she saw him. The sound of his boots on the boardwalk outside had a particular quality of intent, the stride of a man who had been informed of something and did not approve. He came through the door, and his gaze went immediately to Charlotte, then to Wyatt, then to Howard Pratt, and she watched the sequence of reactions cross his face, controlled surprise at the first cold reassessment, at the second, and at Howard Pratt. Something that was unmistakably genuine shock. "Howard," he said. Howard Pratt looked at him with 5 years of carefully maintained composure and said, "Nathan," in the tone of a man who had nothing left to manage. Greer looked at Del Forsyth. "I've reviewed the documentation," Forsyth said. He had the look of a man who had made a decision and was not entirely at peace with it, but was going to hold to it anyway. "There is a documented error in the county tax record that invalidates the grounds for the August 14th auction. I'm ruling the sale improper and the deed invalid. The property reverts to its pre-auction standing." The silence in the room was complete. Then Greer said very quietly, "You're making a mistake." "I'm following the documentation," Forsyth said. Greer looked at Charlotte. He looked at her the way he might look at something small that had accomplished something inexplicable, and the fury underneath his composure was almost clean in its directness. At least it was honest, she thought. At least he wasn't pretending anymore to be giving advice. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Charlotte said. "I don't imagine it is." She picked up her satchel. "But the larkspur is mine today, and that's what matters today." She walked out. Wyatt came out behind her a moment later. He caught up with her 2 steps from the door, and they walked side by side down the boardwalk without speaking. The August heat pressed down on both of them, and the street was busy with ordinary morning life, and Charlotte felt something in her chest that was almost too large to name. Not triumph. Exactly because Greer had said it wasn't over, and she believed him, and there was still the banknote, and the September deadline, and 100 things unresolved. But the land was hers. For today, the land was hers. "You were good in there," Wyatt said. "I prepared," she said. "That's not all it was." She didn't answer. They reached the post where Gerald was tied she'd brought him because he liked outings and had strong opinions about being left behind. And he regarded their return with the air of someone who had been waiting an inexcusable length of time, but was willing to overlook it if something interesting had happened. "Forsyth's going to hear from Greer's attorney by end of day," Wyatt said. "I know. This moves to a formal legal challenge." "I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need you to know something." She looked at him. "I came here because of a clerical error, and because it bothered me," he said. "That's still true." He paused. "But I'm staying because I want to, and I want you to know the difference." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment, at his steady hands and his careful eyes, and the tiredness around them that she had begun to understand was the particular tiredness of a man who had been hard on himself for a long time. She thought about the 5 days he'd been gone, and how the fence had felt different to work without another person's presence nearby. She thought about May Whitfield's basket, and Howard Pratt's documentation, and the county attorney's face when he made his decision. She thought about what it meant to have people, to know your people, to stand in a room and not be standing in it alone. "All right," she said. It was not a small thing for Charlotte Parker to say all right to that. He understood what it cost. She could see that he understood. "The north section still needs wire," she said. "And Gerald's going to be insufferable if we don't get him home by noon." Wyatt looked at Gerald. Gerald looked back with the complete moral authority of a mule who had been promised carrots. "Let's go home then," Wyatt said. And Charlotte untied the lead and started walking, and Wyatt fell into step beside her, and the sun was high and the road was familiar. And behind them, Dust Valley went on, being exactly what it was, complicated and limited and real, and ahead of them, the larkspur waited. The way, good land always waits, patient and indifferent and entirely worth fighting for. Greer's attorney arrived in Dust Valley on a Tuesday. Charlotte knew because May sent her a note by way of the Whitfield boy, who rode it out to the larkspur on a borrowed horse and handed it to her at the fence line, where she and Wyatt were finishing the last section of wire. The note said Reginald Holt. Came in on the morning stage, went straight to the land office. Thought you should know. Charlotte read it twice, folded it, put it in her coat pocket. "Greer's attorney," she said. Wyatt set down the wire stretcher. "Reginald Holt." She looked at him. "You know him." "I know of him. He's a Denver man. Does property law for people who can afford Denver prices." He paused. "He's good." "Better than your attorney." "Different kind of good. My attorney knows the law. Holt knows how to work around it. He picked the wire stretcher back up. We need to finish this section today. They finished it. Charlotte worked faster than she'd worked all week. Not because of panic. She recognized the difference between panic and urgency, and was careful about which one she let drive her, but because there was something clarifying about knowing the fight had escalated. You stopped worrying about the edges when the center came into focus. By late afternoon, the east fence line was complete. Every post set, every section tensioned, every gap closed. She and Wyatt stood at the creek bend and looked at the full length of it, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Your father would recognize that work, Wyatt said. Charlotte didn't answer. She pressed her hand flat against the top of the nearest post and felt the solidity of it. Cedar and packed earth and wire held at proper tension, and she thought about her father standing at this same line 30 years ago, deciding to build a fence instead of a wall, deciding to mark a boundary without closing himself off entirely from the land around him. A fence isn't to keep people out, he'd told her once. It's to know where you stand. Let's go see what Reginald Holt is planning, she said. They didn't go to Holt. Holt came to them. He arrived at the Larkspur the following morning in a hired buggy with a briefcase on his lap and the particular tidiness of a man who took pains to look unimpressive in situations where looking impressive would put people on guard. He was in his mid-50s, Charlotte estimated, with silver hair and the settled patience of someone who spent his professional life waiting for people to realize they were in a worse position than they'd thought. Charlotte met him on the porch. Wyatt stood slightly behind her and to the right, not in a protective way, not in a way that positioned him as the decision-maker, but in the way of a man who was present and paying attention and had made it clear that he was not going to be conveniently absent. Miss Parker, Holt said. He removed his hat. I'm Reginald Holt. I represent Mr. Nathan Greer in matters pertaining to... I know who you are, Charlotte said. Come up and sit down. He came up. She did not offer coffee, which she understood was a social choice he would register and file accordingly. I'll be direct, he said, settling into the porch chair with his briefcase across his knees. Mr. Greer recognized that the county attorney's ruling creates a legal complication. He's prepared to acknowledge it. That's generous of him, Charlotte said. He's also prepared to make an offer. Holt opened his briefcase and produced a folded paper, which he set on the rail between them without handing it to her. $300 for the property clear title transfer plus forgiveness of the outstanding banknote. Charlotte looked in the paper without picking it up. $300 was almost exactly what the land was worth on the general market, not what it was worth to her, not what it was worth for the water rights, not what it would be worth in 10 years when the county grew out this direction. $300, and the note forgiven was an offer engineered to look generous while solving every problem Nathan Greer had, and it was the kind of offer that required a woman to choose between keeping land she couldn't hold and taking money that solved her immediate problems and permanently ended everything her father had built. No, she said. Holt didn't react. Miss Parker, I want to be transparent with you about the legal landscape. I'm sure you do, Charlotte said. But I said no, Mr. Holt. Is there something else? He looked at her. Then he looked at Wyatt. Whatever calculation he was doing behind his settled, patient face, it ran quickly. Mr. Greer anticipated this response, he said. He asked me to inform you that he will be challenging the county attorney's ruling in circuit court. The process will take several months and will be, he paused, expensive. For everyone, Wyatt said. Holt's eyes moved to him. Mr. Cole, you're a land title examiner from Denver. You don't have a legal stake in this property. No, Wyatt said. But I have the documentation that makes Miss Parker's case, and I have the attorney who's going to present it, and I have 6 years' worth of county records that tell an interesting story about how Nathan Greer accumulates land. He said this with perfect evenness. That's enough of a stake. Holt studied him. Charlotte watched Holt study him, and she watched Wyatt receive that scrutiny without any adjustment in his expression, and she felt something settle in her chest that she recognized distantly as trust. The careful, earned kind that she did not give easily. I'll convey your answer to Mr. Greer, Holt said. He stood, picked up his briefcase, replaced his hat. I would encourage you, Miss Parker, to consider the offer carefully before the circuit court filing is made. Once that process begins, it cannot be undone quietly." "It was never quiet," Charlotte said. "It was done in front of 40 people in the town square. It was never going to be quiet." He left. They watched the buggy go. A minute passed, then another. "He's testing us," Wyatt said. "He's reporting back," Charlotte said. "Greer wanted to see whether we'd take the money." She paused. "He also wanted to see what you are to this situation." "What did he see?" Charlotte looked at him sideways. "Enough to complicate things." Greer. She moved toward the door. "We need to write to your attorney today. If Holt is filing a circuit court challenge, we need to be positioned before he files." They spent the rest of the morning at the kitchen table with paper and ink and the organized documentation Charlotte had assembled the week before. Wyatt knew the legal architecture in the way of a man who had spent 8 years in the machinery of land title law and understood where the weight-bearing points were. Charlotte knew the specific history of the Larkspur and the county records and the sequence of events in a way that only the person who had lived them could know. Together, they wrote a letter that was precise and evidenced and said very clearly that they were not going away. She sent it with the afternoon post. That evening, Wyatt cooked supper for the first time, salt pork and cornbread, and a pot of beans that was better than she'd expected, which she told him because she had decided early in their acquaintance that she was going to be honest with him the way she would want someone to be honest with her. "You can cook," she said. "I told you some," he said. "You understated it." "I didn't want to oversell," he said, and the small pull at the corner of his mouth was there again, and she looked away from it because it was the kind of thing she was trying not to inventory. "Tell me something," she said, and she didn't plan the words before she said them, which was not her usual way. He looked at her. "You said you had a brother in Texas, that you don't correspond much." She turned her cup in her hands. "What happened?" How was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of a person deciding how far to go into something they've been keeping careful distance from. She watched him decide, and she watched him choose to answer, and she understood that both things were significant. "After the war," he said, "I came back different. Most men do, I know that. But my brother James, he expected me to come back the same. To pick up the ranch work, take my half of what our father had built settle." He paused. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't stay in one place, couldn't be who he remembered." He set his fork down. "He said I was running away. I said I was surviving. We never found a way to agree on which one was right." Charlotte was quiet. "He's got a family now," Wyatt said. "Good woman, 3 kids. He writes at Christmas and I write back. It's civil." He said the word with the particular care of someone for whom civil represented both more than nothing and less than enough. "I think he's decided I'm a man who can't be counted on to stay." "And what do you think?" Charlotte said. He looked at her directly. "I think he might have been right for a long time." He paused. "I'm not sure he's right anymore." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at her cup. "My mother used to say that people don't change," she said. "My father said that was wrong. He said people don't change their nature, but they change what they do with it." She paused. "He was the most stubborn man I've ever known, and he used that stubbornness to build this property for 30 years. Same quality, different application." Wyatt was quiet. She could feel the weight of his attention. "What are you stubborn about?" he said. "Everything," she said. "But mostly about the difference between what I deserve and what people have decided I deserve." She said it plainly, the way she said things that mattered to her without decoration, because decoration had always felt like apology, and she was finished apologizing for the truth of her own life. "Those are 2 different numbers, and I'm not going to let anyone add them together and call it the same figure." He looked at her for a long time. Something moved in his face that she was beginning to recognize the look of a man who found what he was looking at valuable and was still deciding whether he was allowed to say so. "No," he said finally. "I don't reckon you should." The storm came on a Friday. August in Dust Valley didn't normally run to weather. The county's summer storms were usually brief and theatrical, impressive, but not catastrophic. This one was different. Charlotte woke to the specifics pressure in her ears that meant serious weather, and went to the window and saw the sky in the east doing things that made her move fast. She was already dressed and at the barn door when Wyatt appeared behind her. "I saw it from my window," he said. He had his boots on and his coat and his hat and the particular focus of a man who had moved from sleep to action without confusion in between. "The horses first," she said. "Then the hay. The barn door on the west side won't hold if the wind comes from the northwest. I'll do the door. You get the horses settled." They split and moved, and the storm came faster than either of them had calculated. The wind hit the west side of the barn like something with a grudge, and Charlotte heard the barn door go the crack of wood against the frame, and she had both horses in their stalls with the pins in and was coming around the corner of the barn when she saw the hay barn. The roof section on the northeast corner was lifting. Wyatt was already there, ahead of her already. Up the side of the hay barn on the exterior brace his weight against the lifting section, and the rain hit then hard and sideways, and Charlotte could see immediately that one person's weight was not sufficient. She went up the other side. The brace was slick, and the wind was determined, and she was not a small woman, which in that moment was not a liability. It was precisely the kind of ballast the situation required. She got her weight against the section, and found her grip and held, and the wind pressed back, and for a long and specific moment, it was a direct negotiation between two people and a storm about what was going to give first. The storm blinked. The roof section settled. She could feel Wyatt's presence on the other side of it. His weight, his grip, the fact of his not letting go. And she pressed harder, and the section came down another inch and then held, and the wind moved from northwest to straight north, and the angle changed and the pressure released. They got it pinned with 2 spare boards and a length of wire that Charlotte had in her coat pocket, because she had learned years ago to carry wire the way other women carried handkerchiefs. You always needed it eventually. When they came down, the rain was still coming hard and horizontal, and the square of the barnyard was running water. Charlotte stood in it with her hair soaked through and her coat plastered to her shoulders, and looked at the hay barn roof. It was holding. The rest was intact. "How's the main barn?" she said. "Door's done," Wyatt said. He was soaked to the same degree she was hair dark with rain, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. "Everything else held." "The garden's going to be a loss," she said. "Some of it. The summer squash for certain. It was too tall. We can replant the second growth if the storm breaks by Sunday." She looked at him, standing in the rain in her barnyard, like he had assessed the replanting timeline and filed it as a practical matter, like it was simply the next task, like he had already decided this was his problem to solve alongside hers. "You said she said. He held her gaze, rain coming down between them. "I did." Charlotte looked away first. She pressed both her wet hands against her wet face for a moment, not in distress, but in the way of someone who needs a second to decide what she's doing with something too large to set down carelessly. "Go get dry," she said. "I'll check the garden and the chicken coop." "I'll do the chicken coop," he said. "Wyatt?" "Charlotte." He said her name quietly, and it landed precisely. "Let me do the chicken coop." She let him do the chicken coop. The real damage showed itself when the storm cleared. The hay barn roof section they'd repinned needed proper repair. 2 new boards minimum, probably 3, and resetting the ridge cap. The garden had lost the squash as she'd predicted, and 2 rows of late beans that had been 2 weeks from harvest. The south fence had a section down where a tree limb had come through. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that couldn't be repaired. But that evening, drying out by the stove with 2 cups of coffee between them, Charlotte's mind was not on the roof or the fence or the garden. It was on the thing Wyatt had said in the rain, the way he'd said "we," and the way she had heard it. She was a careful woman. She had been a careful woman for 31 years, most of them spent learning that the cost of not being careful was paid in a currency that was hard to replenish. She did not give things away that she could not get back. She did not let herself want what the evidence suggested she was not going to have. She was not being careful about Wyatt Cole, and she was aware of this, and she was not sure yet what to do about the awareness. "You're thinking loudly," he said. She looked across the stove at him. "How can you tell?" "You've turned that cup around 4 times, he said. "You only do that when you're working something out." She set the cup down, looked at her hands, looked at him. "How long do you intend to stay?" she said. She asked it the way she asked everything important, direct, without preamble, because she had found that preamble gave people room to answer something other than the question. How was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "That's not an evasion. I genuinely don't know, and I'm not the kind of man who tells people what they want to hear." "I know you're not." "What I know," he said slowly, "is that I haven't thought about leaving since the first morning we worked the fence together. And I've thought about leaving every place I've been in the last 8 years. He paused. "That's new." Charlotte felt the words settle on her, the way real things settle, not dramatically, not with fireworks, but with weight, with the particular gravity of something that is going to change what comes after. "I am not a woman," she said carefully, "who is going to make herself smaller to fit a situation. I never have been, and I don't intend to start." She held his gaze. "I mean that in every sense." "I know," he said. "People in this town have spent 31 years telling me what I am and what I'm worth, based on what I look like," she said. "I don't need that from inside my own house." "Charlotte," he said, and his voice was quiet and direct and entirely without performance. "I have not once looked at you and seen anything other than who you are. Not once." She studied him. She was good at reading people, her life had required it, and what she saw in his face was the particular quality of a statement that cost something to make. Not because he hadn't meant it, but because he'd said it plainly in full daylight without decoration, and that kind of plainness required a person to mean it all the way. She believed him. That was the most terrifying part. She picked up her cup. "The roof section needs boards from the hardware store," she said. He let her change the subject. That she thought was also something. "I'll go in tomorrow," he said. "I'll come with you," she said. "I need to stop at May's anyway." She paused. "And I want to check whether Holt has filed the circuit court challenge." "He has," Wyatt said. She looked up. "How do you know?" "I stopped at the land office when I went for the fence staples yesterday afternoon." He said it with the same flat precision he brought to every unwelcome fact. "Holt filed Tuesday. The circuit court date is set for September 18th. September 18th was 26 days away. Charlotte absorbed this. Set it next to the banknote due September 1st. Set it next to the roof and the storm damage and the garden loss and the $4 and change she had left in the tin box under the floorboard, which was going to need to stretch very far in very little time. "All right," she said. "Charlotte." "I said all right," she said, and the steadiness in her voice was real, not performed, because she had learned a long time ago that steadiness was not the absence of fear. It was deciding to move anyway. Then the knock came at the door. It was past 8 o'clock. Charlotte and Wyatt both went still for a moment, the specific stillness of people who recognized that a knock at this hour was not a social call. Charlotte stood. Wyatt stood with her. She went to the door and opened it. Howard Pratt was standing on her porch with his hat in his hands and rain still on his coat, and his face had the look of a man who had ridden somewhere quickly and had not enjoyed the reason for the speed. "Howard," Charlotte said. "Come in." "I won't stay," he said. "I just came from the bank." He looked at her steadily. "Hollis Crane called your note this evening." The words landed with the particular precision of something that had been aimed carefully. "Not September 1st. This evening. Now." "He can't do that," Wyatt said from behind her. "The note terms." "The note has an acceleration clause," Howard said. "If the property is subject to legal dispute, the bank can call the full balance immediately. Crane invoked it an hour ago." He paused. "You have 72 hours to produce $80, or the bank takes the note to judgment." $80. Charlotte had $4 and change. She had a milk cow and a mule and 2 horses and a hay barn with a damaged roof and a garden that had lost its best summer crop in a storm tonight. She had the legal documentation that Wyatt had ridden to Denver for, and she had Howard Pratt standing on her porch in the dark, and she had May Whitfield on the other side of town, who had talked to people, and she had 26 days until the circuit court date. She did not have $80. Greer, she said. Howard nodded. He's had Crane in his pocket for years. I should have seen this move coming. He looked genuinely angry at himself, and Charlotte did not have the emotional surplus right now to reassure him, so she didn't try. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I underestimated how fast he'd move after Holt filed. She stood in the open door for a moment. Felt the night air on her face cool after the storm. Felt the specific quality of a situation, narrowing around you, not closing entirely, not yet, but narrowing the options, reducing to something you could count. Then Wyatt said, I have $80. No, Charlotte said immediately. Charlotte? We already had this conversation. We had a different version of it, he said, and his voice was level and careful, and not going to be redirected. You said you wouldn't take money from me, but I'm not offering money. I'm offering to cover a banknote on a property whose legal situation I'm directly involved in creating. That's different. That's the same. It's not, he said. If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't pushed Greer at the auction, if I hadn't filed the documentation challenge that triggered the acceleration clause, then Greer wouldn't have had the grounds to invoke it. This is my problem as much as yours. Charlotte turned and looked at him. Howard Pratt had gone very quiet in the way of a man who understood he was witnessing something private. If I take your money, she said, and we lose the circuit court challenge, I have given you $80 of debt on top of $450 of debt and 8 days of your labor for nothing. That's my calculation to make, he said. And this is my land, she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen doorway, and the silence between them had weight and texture and a specific shape that they were both reading. Split it, she said finally. What? $40 from you. I'll get 40. She had no idea yet how she was going to get $40 in 72 hours. But that was a problem that existed in the future, and this conversation existed now. It's a partnership, not a charity. We split it. He looked at her for a long moment. Where are you going to get $40? I'm going to ask May Whitfield, she said. And if May can't, I'm going to ask Howard, who will tell me no, but will tell me who else to ask. She looked at Howard, who had the expression of a man realizing he was probably going to lend $40. Aren't you Howard? Howard sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had made his peace with a decision. I'll have it here by noon tomorrow, he said. Wyatt looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked back at Wyatt. Then it's settled, she said. It's settled, he said. Howard put his hat back on. There's one more thing, he said, and something in his voice changed in a way that made Charlotte go careful. She waited. Greer was at the Drover's Rest tonight, Howard said. Before I came here, he was not happy. He had 2 of his men with him, and he was talking about the property dispute in a way that people overheard. He paused. He said that a man who gets involved in other people's business ought to think about whether he'll still be welcome in the county after the business concludes. The room went quiet. Charlotte looked at Wyatt. His face had done something very controlled and very still, and she recognized it. The expression of a man who had been in situations where the threat had teeth, who was assessing whether this one did. It's a warning, Howard said. I don't know if it's anything more than that. It's more than that, Wyatt said. His voice was completely even. Greer doesn't make statements he doesn't intend to follow through on. That's not his pattern. No, Charlotte said. It isn't. Howard left. The door closed. She and Wyatt stood in the kitchen, and the stove had gone low, and the night was pressing against the windows, and Charlotte felt the moment, clearly felt the full scope of what they were standing in. This had stopped being a property dispute somewhere in the last 2 weeks. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, because it had shifted the way weather shifts gradually, and then all at once. It had become something else. Something that had Nathan Greer making threats in public. Something that had a circuit court date, and a banknote, and a storm-damaged roof, and 2 people in a kitchen who had said we and partnership. And this is my problem as much as yours. And we're now looking at each other across the distance of what came next. You should leave, Charlotte said. Wyatt went absolutely still. Not, she said, and stopped. She pressed her hands flat on the table. I'm not saying what happened in Denver was wrong or what you did at the auction or any of it. I'm saying that whatever Greer intends by that threat is going to be directed at you specifically because you're the one without roots here. You're the one he can move against without the county watching too closely. She made herself look at him. You came here for a clerical error. You have done more than anyone could have reasonably expected. If you leave now before Greer makes a move against you personally, that's reasonable. That's smart. I was very quiet. I'll understand, she said, and she meant it, and it cost her. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table, mirroring hers, without the theater of the gesture. Just two people with their palms down on a kitchen table, present, grounded, real. Charlotte, he said, I told you 2 days ago that I was staying because I wanted to. I told you the difference mattered. Did you hear me when I said that? She had heard him. She had heard every word. Then let me make a decision, he said, without you deciding for me whether I've thought it through. She looked at him. He looked back. Greer's going to move fast, she said finally. Then we move faster, he said. We need the circuit court filing reviewed by your attorney before Monday. I'll write tonight. And we need to know who else Greer has talked to about this. If he's making public threats, he's building towards something specific. Howard can find out. And the banknote. Noon tomorrow, he said. And the hay barn roof. Saturday, he said. You and me and Gerald. She stopped. She looked at him. This man who had appeared at the edge of a square one August morning, with dust on his coat and a document from a Denver archive, and the particular attention of someone who did not look at her and see what everyone else saw, and she felt the weight of everything that was happening around them, and the quieter, larger weight of what was happening between them. And she thought about her mother and her father, and the 30 years they had worked this land together, and the particular quality of a person who says we like, they mean it down to the bone. She thought about the fence line, repaired, complete, holding. All right, she said. It was the second time she'd said it to him that way. He remembered the first. She could see that he remembered. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to start early. She almost said something else. She could feel the shape of it, the words that were sitting right at the edge of what she was willing to say. Yet, right at the boundary of what she'd decided was safe to want. She felt them there, and she chose not to say them, because some things needed more ground under them before you could build on them, and she had learned that rushing a foundation was how you lost everything. But she thought them. She thought them very clearly. She went to bed. Outside, the last of the storm was moving east, and the night was still and clean, the way nights get. After weather has scrubbed through them, and the larkspur sat in the quiet with all its fences intact, and Nathan Greer was somewhere in the dark, making calculations, and Wyatt Cole was in her father's room, probably not sleeping either, and Charlotte Parker lay on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and understood with the clear-eyed certainty she reserved for things she could not talk herself out of, that this was not going to end with a legal ruling. Whatever this was, it was going to end. The way real things ended, not cleanly, not quickly, and not without cost. But it was going to end with her standing on her own land. She was certain of that much. She held on to that certainty like a post driven deep, and she closed her eyes, and she waited for morning. The banknote was paid at 11:47 the following morning. Charlotte knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock on the wall behind Hollis Crane's desk from the moment she walked in, and she had watched it with the specific attention of a woman who understood that every minute inside that building was a minute Nathan Greer had already tried to buy. Howard Pratt stood to her left. Wyatt stood to her right. She put the money on the desk herself, her $40, and Wyatt's $40 counted out in bills and coin. And she watched Hollis Crane's face do the particular thing a man's face does when a plan he was confident in fails to execute. He counted the money twice. His hands weren't quite steady. The acceleration clause is satisfied, Charlotte said. I'd like that in writing, Mr. Crane. Miss Parker. In writing, she said. Today. He wrote it. He signed it. She took the paper, folded it, placed it in the satchel beside the Denver documentation and the county records and the 31 years of her father's careful handwriting on tax receipts, and she walked out of the Dust Valley Savings and Loan into the August heat with her chin up and her hands steady, and the specific satisfaction of a person who has just taken back something that was never supposed to be taken from them. On the boardwalk, Howard said, "That's one problem resolved." "That's one problem resolved," Charlotte agreed. We have 9 more. Only 9, Wyatt said. I'm being optimistic, she said. Howard almost smiled. It was the closest she'd seen him get. They split up on Main Street. Howard back to his office, Charlotte and Wyatt toward the general store for the barn roof boards they needed. The morning was already hot, and the town was busy in the particular way of a place that had absorbed a piece of news and was still deciding what to do with it. Charlotte could feel the awareness of her moving through the street before she could see its evidence, the way conversations paused and resumed, the way eyes found her, and then looked elsewhere. The way 2 women outside the milliner's shop stopped talking when she passed and started again only after she'd gone by. She had lived with this her whole life. The specific weather of being noticed and then deliberately not noticed. Of taking up space in a town that had decided before she could consent to the decision what kind of space she was permitted. Today, it felt different. Not smaller. It was still there, still had the same texture it had always had, but it sat differently on her. Like something she was carrying instead of something being done to her. She couldn't entirely account for the difference. They're looking at you, Wyatt said, not in a way that was either sympathetic or surprised, just noting a fact the way he noted most facts. They always look, Charlotte said. They're looking different today. She thought about that. They saw me walk into the bank with Howard Pratt and walk back out, she said. In a town this size, that's an event. It's more than that, he said. She looked at him sideways. He had his hat pulled low against the sun, and his eyes were moving the way they always moved in public spaces, taking inventory, not with anxiety, but with the steady habit of someone who had learned that awareness was a form of safety. But his attention kept coming back to her specifically in a way she was beginning to recognize as intentional rather than incidental. What is it then? She said. You walked in there like it was your bank, he said. Like it had always been your bank, and Crane had made some kind of administrative error that you were graciously coming to correct. He paused. People notice when a woman walks like that. Charlotte didn't answer. She pushed the door of the general store open. Inside, Thomas Waverly, who had run the store for 20 years and sold her father everything from seed to wire to the particular brand of coffee her mother had liked, was behind the counter with 2 customers. He looked up when she came in. He held her gaze for a beat longer than usual, and then he said something Charlotte had never heard him say in 31 years of shopping in his store. Miss Parker, you need anything special today, you let me know. She stopped. I need 6 boards for a barn roof repair, Thomas. The usual cedar. I'll pull them myself, he said. Give you the account price. She looked at him. He looked back with the expression of a man who had something he wanted to say, and was saying it in the only available vocabulary. Thank you, she said. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. They got the boards loaded on Gerald and started back, and they were 2 miles out of town when Wyatt said, Tell me something. She glanced at him. I was riding alongside the bay gelding matching Gerald's pace without complaint. What? She said. When Greer first made an offer on the property, the first time. What did he say exactly? She thought back. He came to the house. I was 25. My father had been dead 4 months and I was still... She paused, selecting the honest word. Disoriented. He sat at this same kitchen table and he was very polite. He said the land was more than a single woman could manage responsibly. He said it as though he was doing me a favor to notice. What did you say? I thanked him for his time, Charlotte said. And then I showed him to the door. Wyatt was quiet for the moment. He didn't expect that. No, men like Greer never expect it. She kept her eyes on the road. They look at a woman like me, and they see the arithmetic of the situation alone. Physical appearance, outside what the century considers marriageable property in arrears, and they decide the math adds up to desperation. They're always surprised when it doesn't. What does it add up to in your accounting? She considered the question seriously, the way he'd asked it genuinely, without the particular condescension of a man who expected her to demonstrate uncertainty. Competence, she said. Stubbornness. 8 years of learning how to do every job on this property with the hands I was given. She paused. And sufficient sense to know that what a man like Greer offers is never worth what it costs. He nodded. It was not the nod of agreement for its own sake. It was the nod of a man receiving information he had already suspected and was now confirmed in. "He's not going to stop at the circuit court," Wyatt said. "I know. Whatever he's planning for between now and September 18th, it's going to be more personal than a legal filing." "I know that too," Charlotte said. "He made a public threat at the Drover's Rest. That's not accidental. That's calculated escalation." She looked at Wyatt. "He wants you to leave before the court date. If you're gone, the documentation challenge is harder to present. I'm not an attorney. I can show the papers, but I can't argue the legal framework the way you can." "I'm not leaving," Wyatt said. "I know," she said. "But he doesn't know that yet. And whatever he's going to do it in the next 10 days. They rode in silence for a moment. Gerald's hooves on the dry road made a sound that Charlotte had been hearing her whole life, and she found it steadying in the specific way that familiar rhythms are steadying, not because they made the difficult things easier, but because they reminded you that difficult things had a context larger than themselves. "There's something I haven't told you," Wyatt said. She turned to look at him. His voice had changed, not dramatically, but enough that she noticed. A slight change in how he was holding the words. "When I came to Dust Valley," he said, "when I first saw the auction notice, the one I saw 6 months ago, the preliminary filing, it wasn't chance." She waited. "I've been doing land title work in this region for 3 years," he said, "specifically tracking cases in counties where property acquisitions show a pattern." He paused. "Greer's name appears in 4 separate case files across 3 counties. Each time a single woman. Each time a property with water rights. Each time a documentation irregularity in the county record that benefited Greer's position." Charlotte went still. "You were investigating him." "Not officially. It's not I don't have official standing to investigate anything. But I track patterns. It's what I do." He looked at her. "Your case is not isolated. There are 4 women before you who lost land they should not have lost. And in 3 of those cases, the county records show the same kind of clerical error that appeared in yours. The same transposition. Similar enough to be a method, not a coincidence." Charlotte's mind moved fast through the implications. "If you can document the pattern, if I can document the pattern, it changes the nature of the circuit court case entirely. It moves from a single property dispute to a documented pattern of fraudulent county record manipulation." He held her gaze. "That's a criminal matter, not a civil one." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't have the documentation to say it yet," he said. "I had the pattern in my own notes, but pattern isn't proof. The Denver trip part of what I was doing there wasn't just retrieving the original receipt. I was pulling the files on the other 3 cases and finding the specific points of comparison." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "I have it now." Charlotte took the document. She opened it. It was dense with dates and parcel numbers and cross-references. The specific language of a man who understood land title law well enough to know where the bodies were buried in the paperwork. She read it twice. "This is enough," she said. "It's enough to take it to a territorial judge," he said. "Not the circuit court, above it." He paused. "But doing that bypasses the county entirely, which means it bypasses every institutional relationship Greer has built in this county over 30 years. And it means the case is no longer about the Larkspur specifically, it's about all 4 properties, all 4 women." Charlotte thought about that. 4 women. 3 of them had lost their land and not gotten it back. Whatever they were doing right now, wherever they were, whatever lives the loss of their land had forced them into, they did not know that someone had found the thread that connected their situation to Charlotte's. "I need to contact them," she said. Wyatt looked at her. "Charlotte, if we're taking this to a territorial judge, we need more than documentation," she said. "We need testimony. We need the women who lost the properties to say what happened, and we need them to say it in front of a judge who has the authority to do something about it." She looked at him steadily. "Where are they?" He was quiet for a moment. "1 is in Denver. 2 are still in the county, different towns, smaller than Dust Valley. The 4th..." He stopped. "What happened to the 4th?" "She lost her property in 1879, he said. "After she lost the property, she had no income and no family. The record stops in 1880. He said it with the specific restraint of a person controlling their feelings about a fact they find intolerable. I don't know where she is. Charlotte sat with that for a moment. Sat with what it meant, the particular end of a story that had started the same way hers had started, with a woman alone on a piece of land, and a man who decided her situation was his opportunity. Then we find the three we can find, she said. And we make sure that what happened to the fourth doesn't happen to any of us again. Wyatt looked at her. The look lasted a second longer than it needed to, and in that second, Charlotte felt it, the specific quality of being seen clearly by someone who understood exactly what you'd said and what it cost to say it. All right, he said. They rode the rest of the way home in a silence that was not empty. May Whitfield knew where one of the women was. That was the thing about May. She had been in Dust Valley long enough that her knowledge of the surrounding counties operated like a second memory of the region, vast and detailed and organized in ways that only became apparent when you needed something specific from it. When Charlotte came to her that afternoon and described what Wyatt had found, May listened with her characteristic stillness and then said, "Agnes Foley. She's in Millhaven, runs a boarding house with her sister." Charlotte looked at her. "You knew Agnes Foley?" "Her mother and my mother were friends," May said. "I know what happened to her property. I always thought the records looked wrong." She paused. "I didn't know there were others." "There are others," Charlotte said. May sat with that for a moment. Something moved through her face that Charlotte recognized as the particular anger of a woman who has suspected something for a long time and has just been told she was right. "I'll write to Agnes tonight," May said. "She'll come if I ask her." "We may need her in Millhaven first," Charlotte said, "to look at her county records, to find the same kind of documentation error." She paused. "Wyatt thinks it's the same method each time." "Wyatt thinks," May said, and there was something in the way she said it, not critical, not intrusive, just noting a fact the way she noted most facts. "He's become important to how you're thinking through this." Charlotte looked at her directly. "He found the pattern. The legal strategy is built on his documentation. That makes him important to the case." "Charlotte," May said. "May." They looked at each other. May had known Charlotte since she was born. She had held Charlotte's mother's hand at the end. She was one of the three people in Charlotte's life who had never required her to be anyone other than who she was, and because of that, she was also one of the three people whose eyes Charlotte could not easily misdirect. "He's a good man," May said simply. "I know he is," Charlotte said. "You know that the way a woman knows something she's been paying close attention to," May said. "Not the way you know a legal colleague is competent." Charlotte was quiet. "You're allowed to know it that way," May said. "You're allowed to want things, Charlotte. You've been running this property and this life for 4 years, with your hands and your back and your stubbornness, and you've done it admirably, and none of that means you owe yourself deprivation." "I don't know what he—" Charlotte started. "Yes, you do," May said. Charlotte stopped. She did know. That was the honest answer. She had known since the rain in the barnyard, since the way he'd stood in the circuit court conversation and said, "I'm staying because I want to," with the specific plainness of a man who didn't use words decoratively. She had been managing the knowledge, carefully storing it somewhere she could access without looking at it directly, which was the Charlotte Parker method for handling things that felt too large to look at straight. "He hasn't said anything definite," Charlotte said. "Some things don't start with words," May said. She picked up her pen. "I'll write to Agnes tonight. You go home and have supper with that man." Charlotte went home and had supper with that man. They ate and cleaned up and sat on the porch in the cooling down end of the August evening, and Charlotte told him about Agnes Foley and May's letter, and Wyatt told her that his attorney had confirmed the territorial judge route was viable if they had documentation from multiple cases. The conversation was practical and specific and covered everything it needed to cover, and then it ran out of practical things and kept going anyway, which was how Charlotte found herself talking about her mother. Not in the careful, managed way she usually talked about her mother, if she talked about her at all. In the actual way, the details, the specific texture of who Eleanor Parker had been, The way she'd laughed at things other women in Dust Valley considered inappropriate, the way she'd taught Charlotte to keep accounts before she taught her to read, the way she'd looked at Charlotte's father in the particular way of someone who had bet their whole life on a person and won. Wyatt listened. He didn't fill the pauses. He didn't try to symmetrize her disclosures with ones of his own. He just listened, which was Charlotte had found over 31 years much rarer than people supposed. When she finished, the evening had gone fully dark, and the stars were out in their summer configurations, and she felt the lightness that comes after you've put something down that you've been carrying a long time. Not gone, not resolved. Just set down for the moment. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," Wyatt said. "She was the best person I've ever known," Charlotte said. "My father was extraordinary, but my mother was the kind of person who made you feel that the world was fundamentally decent, even when it wasn't behaving that way." She paused. "I've spent a lot of years missing that feeling." He was quiet for a moment. "The world isn't always decent," he said. "But sometimes the people in it are." She looked at him. He was looking out at the dark, his profile in the faint lamplight from the window, and she thought again about what May had said, and about what she knew, and what she'd been careful not to look at. She looked at it now. "Wyatt," she said. He turned. "What happens after September 18th?" she said. He held her gaze. "What do you want to happen?" She almost deflected. The impulse was strong. She was a woman who had spent her life turning questions back into practicalities, converting the large and uncertain into the specific and manageable. She felt the familiar pull of it. She didn't deflect. "I want to keep the land," she said. "I want to have done something about Nathan Greer that protects the women after me, not just the woman in the present. And She stopped, started again. "I want to stop eating supper alone." I was very still. "That last part is separate from the legal matter," she said, because she needed to be clear about it. "I'm not saying it to complicate things. I'm saying it because it's true, and I'm not in the habit of leaving true things unsaid simply because they're inconvenient." He turned to face her fully. His hands were on the porch rail, and his eyes were on her face, and she could see him working through something, not uncertainty about what he wanted. She didn't think, but the careful respect of a man who understood that what came next needed to be said right. "Charlotte," he said, "I rode into this county 6 months ago with a copy of a Denver archive and a lodging bill and a significant amount of professional irritation about county record irregularities." He paused. "I did not anticipate any of this." "No," she said. "Neither did I. I'm not a man who has built things," he said. "I've spent 8 years moving between places and fixing things that other people broke and then moving on. I'm good at it. But it's—" He stopped. "It's not a life. It's a skill set." "I know," she said. "This place is a life," he said. "The fence line and Gerald and May Whitfield's basket, and the way you organize your documents in that satchel. Like the order of them is going to be the difference between winning and losing." Something in his voice shifted, became more direct. "The way you walked into that bank this morning." She waited. "I would like to stay," he said. "Past September 18th. Past the circuit court and the territorial judge and Nathan Greer and all of it." He held her gaze. "If you're asking whether I want to stop eating supper alone, yes. I have wanted that for some time. I didn't know how to be sure I'd earned the right to want it." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her parents and the way they'd worked beside each other, and the particular strength that came not from one person being strong, but from two people being strong together, load-bearing in different directions. "You don't earn the right to want things, Wyatt," she said. "You just decide whether to say them." He let out a breath. It was the only entirely unguarded thing she had ever seen him do, that single exhale, and it undid something in her chest that she hadn't known was held tight. "All right," he said. "All right," she said back. They sat together in the dark, and the stars moved, the way they always moved, indifferent and reliable. And below them, the larkspur was quiet, and the fence line held, and the hay barn stood with its new boards bright against the old ones, and nothing had been promised in specific terms. But something had been said that both of them understood, and that was enough for tonight. Greer made his move on a Monday. Charlotte was at the well when she saw the riders, 4 of them coming up the property road from the south. not the county road. The South Property Road, which was Larkspur land, which required her permission to access, which Nathan Greer had never asked for. She put the bucket down and walked to the porch. Wyatt came out of the barn. He'd seen them too. The riders pulled up at the yard gate. Nathan Greer was not among them. That was the first thing she noted. The second was that the man in front was not a ranch hand. He was wearing a town coat, and he was carrying a document case, and he had the particular stiffness of a man performing an official function he was not entirely comfortable with. "Miss Parker," the man said. "I'm Deputy Aldous Crane. I have a notice from the circuit court." "Hollis Crane's nephew," Charlotte said. He flinched slightly. "The circuit court has received a filing from Mr. Nathan Greer's counsel. This notice informs you that a preliminary injunction has been requested to suspend your use of the property's eastern water rights, pending the outcome of the case on September 18th. The eastern water rights, the creek, the only reliable water source on the Larkspur for livestock and irrigation. On what grounds?" Wyatt said. He had come to stand beside Charlotte, and his voice was completely level. "Mr. Greer's filing asserts that the water rights are attached to the deed that was filed in his name on August 15th, Deputy Crane said, and that pending the legal resolution of the deed status, the associated water rights are in dispute and should not be exercised by either party. The deed has been ruled invalid by the county attorney," Charlotte said. "Mr. Greer's counsel is contesting that ruling," Deputy Crane said. He held out the document. "You have 5 days to respond." Charlotte took the document. She looked at it. She felt Wyatt beside her reading it over her shoulder. 5 days, she said. "Yes, ma'am. And in the meantime, the injunction becomes effective upon filing pending your response." He said it with the discomfort of a man delivering something he has been paid to deliver but does not personally endorse. "I'm sorry, Miss Parker." He wasn't sorry enough to have declined the errand. She noted this without saying it. The riders left. Charlotte stood in her yard with the document in her hand, and Wyatt beside her, and the particular sound of the creek, which she could hear from this spot on a still morning, which she had been hearing her whole life. "He can't enforce it before we respond," Wyatt said. "No," Charlotte said. "But if we use the creek before the 5-day window, we give him grounds to escalate." "Then we respond in 2 days," Wyatt said. "Not 5. She looked at him. 2 days. Your attorney. I'll wire him today. He can have a response document filed by Wednesday." He paused. "But Charlotte, this changes the strategy. This is no longer about the deed. He's moved to resource denial. He's trying to make the land unworkable before the court date." She understood. Without the creek, she had a milk cow and 2 horses and a mule and a garden that needed water through September. She had maybe a week before the situation became untenable. "Then we file the territorial judge appeal before Wednesday," she said. "We don't wait for the circuit court date." Wyatt looked at her. "That's aggressive." "He's cutting the water to my land," she said. "I am done being measured in my response." She held his gaze. "Will your attorney move that fast?" "If I ask him to," Wyatt said. "Yes, then ask him." She folded the document. "And tonight I'm going to write letters to Agnes Foley and to the other 2 women in this county. I need them to respond before the circuit court date." "Charlotte?" He paused. Something shifted in his face. "There's something you should know about the other 2 women in the county." She waited. "One of them," he said, "is Edith Marsh. She lives in Carlisle, 12 miles northeast." He paused. "Her property was taken in 1880. She wrote to the county clerk's office in 1881. And in 1882, the record shows her letter was received and filed in the parcel file for a different property." Charlotte stared at him. "It was misfiled." "Same method," he said. "But the misfiled letter, Charlotte, the reference number on the misfiling is in Hollis Crane's handwriting. The bank manager. Hollis Crane, who had called her note 2 days ago. Hollis Crane, whose nephew had just delivered the water rights injunction. He's been doing this since 1879, Charlotte said. At least, Wyatt said. She was quiet for a moment. The magnitude of it settled on her, not with the drama of revelation, but with the slow, cold weight of something that had been true for a long time, regardless of whether anyone was looking at it. "We need Edith Marsh here before September 18th, she said. "I know. And we need someone who knows how to compel Hollis Crane's bank records." "My attorney can file for that through the territorial court," Wyatt said. "If we're moving the appeal up, we do it all at once." Charlotte looked at the document in her hand. Then she looked at the yard gate where the deputy had stood. Then she looked at Wyatt. "He's going to know we're accelerating," she said. "When we file the territorial appeal." "Yes." "He's going to do something before we can finish it." "Yes," Wyatt said again. "Which is why—" He stopped. "What?" He looked at her steadily. "I need you to let me handle the next 3 days," he said. "The wire's the attorney coordinating with Howard, contacting Edith Marsh. I need you to trust me to handle it and focus on keeping this property running." She looked at him. "You're asking me to step back?" "I'm asking you to do your job while I do mine," he said. "We're better as two people working two problems simultaneously than as one person trying to hold everything." It was not the same as being told to step aside. She could feel the difference. One was about limitation, the assumption that she was not capable. The other was about partnership, the understanding that two capable people divided the load. She handed him the document. "Wednesday," she said. "Both filings." "Wednesday," he said. "And you tell me everything your attorney says," she said. "Every word." "Every word," he agreed. She went back to the well to get her water. Behind her, she heard him go back into the barn, and then the sound of him saddling the bay gelding for the ride to town, to send the wire, and she filled her bucket and carried it back to the house and set it on the kitchen counter, and looked at her father's handwriting on the tax receipt still pinned to the wall above the desk. "Know where you stand," he'd said. "A fence isn't to keep people out. It's to know where you stand." She knew where she stood. She stood on the Larkspur, on land that had belonged to her family for 11 years, on ground that contained her father's grave and her mother's flower garden, and 31 years of her own life, accumulated in the specific way that only happens when a place is truly yours. She stood on it with the creek within hearing distance, and the fence line complete, and the hay barn repaired, and a man saddling his horse in her barn to ride to town on her behalf. She stood on it, and it was enough, and she was not going to move. Outside, she heard Wyatt ride out. The hoofbeats faded south toward town, fast and purposeful, and Charlotte Parker stood in her kitchen in the August heat and began to write the letter to Edith Marsh that she should have been able to write years ago to a woman she had never met, who had lost what Charlotte had nearly lost, who deserved to know that someone had finally found the thread. "Dear Mrs. Marsh," she wrote, "my name is Charlotte Parker. I believe you and I have more in common than either of us knew." She wrote the truth plainly and completely the way she did everything that mattered. The creek ran outside her window. Nobody was taking it. Edith Marsh arrived on a Thursday. Charlotte heard the wagon before she saw it, and she came off the porch with her hands still damp from the dishes, and her hair still pinned from the morning, and she watched a woman climb down from a hired rig with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been sitting for a long time and whose body was reminding her of it. Edith Marsh was 53 years old, narrow-shouldered and gray-haired, and she moved across the yard toward Charlotte with the specific walk of a woman who had decided something before she arrived and was not going to be talked out of it. She stopped 2 feet away. She looked at Charlotte directly. "You're her," she said. "I'm her," Charlotte said. Edith Marsh put out her hand. Charlotte took it. The handshake was firm and brief, and said everything that needed saying before either of them found words for it. "Come inside," Charlotte said. "There's coffee." Agnes Foley had come 2 days earlier on Tuesday morning in a wagon driven by her sister with a letter from May Whitfield in her coat pocket, and 31 years of unresolved anger sitting very quietly behind her eyes. She was younger than Charlotte had expected. 44, lean and weathered with the particular economy of movement of a woman who had spent the last 12 years running a boarding house on the income of her own labor and had learned not to waste anything. She had sat at Charlotte's kitchen table and read Wyatt's documentation in complete silence, and when she finished, she had set the papers down and said, "I knew the numbers were wrong. I told 3 different people the numbers were wrong." "They didn't listen," Charlotte said. "They didn't listen. Agnes agreed. Then, who do I need to talk to? Wyatt had driven to Carlisle to retrieve Edith himself, because Charlotte's letter had arrived and Edith had responded by the next post 3 lines. No preamble, I'll come. Tell me when and where. I have documents of my own. The documents of her own had turned out to be 6 years of careful records that Edith Marsh had kept in a locked box under her boarding house bed. Every letter she'd written to the county clerk. Every non-response she'd received, every detail of the afternoon in 1880, when a man from the county office had come to her door with a notice, and she'd stood on her porch and watched everything her husband had built get taken from her hands by paperwork she hadn't been allowed to see until it was already done. Why did you keep all of it? Charlotte asked her, sitting across the kitchen table now, with coffee between them and Agnes on the third chair, and Wyatt leaning against the counter, reading Edith's documents, with the focused attention of a man who had found exactly what he'd been looking for. Edith looked at her steadily. Because I knew one day it was going to matter, she said. I didn't know to who or when, but I kept it. Wyatt looked up from the papers. Mrs. Marsh, he said, the parcel reference number in your 1881 letter to the county clerk, the one that was misfiled. Hollis Crane's handwriting, Edith said. I recognized it because he'd signed my husband's original note. I never forgot it. She paused. I told a lawyer in Carlisle in 1882. He said it was insufficient to prove anything. It's sufficient now, Wyatt said. Combined with the Larkspur documentation and Agnes's records, it establishes a consistent method across 5 years and 3 counties. That's not a coincidence, and it's not an error. He looked at Charlotte. We file tomorrow. Tomorrow, Charlotte said. The territorial court clerk's office opens at 8, he said. I want to be in front of a judge by noon. Agnes set her cup down with a small definitive sound. I want to be there, she said. So do I, said Edith. Charlotte looked at both of them. 2 women who had lost what she had nearly lost, who had carried their records and their anger and their careful documentation through years of being told it wasn't sufficient, wasn't enough, wasn't worth anyone's time. She felt the weight of their presence at her table like something physical, not burden, but ballast. The kind of weight that helps a ship hold its line. Then we all go, Charlotte said. Wyatt wired his attorney that night, and the attorney replied within the hour the filing was ready. The documentation was organized. The territorial judge had been contacted and had agreed to a preliminary review on the grounds of documentary evidence of systemic fraud. It was moving faster than Charlotte had let herself hope, and because she was Charlotte Parker, and hope was something she handled carefully, she spent the evening checking the documentation one final time, instead of feeling encouraged. She was at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock when Wyatt came and sat across from her and didn't say anything for a moment. Go to bed, she said without looking up. You go to bed, he said. I'm checking the sequence of the parcel references. You've checked it 4 times. The 4th time might be the one that finds something, Charlotte. His voice was quiet and specific. You know this material better than anyone in that courtroom is going to know it. Checking it a 5th time is not preparation. It's fear-wearing preparation's coat. She looked up. He was watching her with the direct attention she had come to understand was not intrusion, but presence. The look of a man who saw her clearly and was not going to pretend he didn't. I know, she said. Greer is going to be there, he said. He'll know we've escalated, and he'll bring Holt and whoever else he can put in that room. It's going to be loud, and it's going to be unpleasant, and he's going to say things designed to make you feel small. He's been doing that since I was 25, she said. I know, he said, but tomorrow will be the last time. She looked at him across the table. The lamp was low between them, and his face was half in shadow and half in light, and she thought about the morning he'd appeared at the edge of the auction square with dust on his coat and a document from Denver. And she thought about the fence line and the storm and the bank and the porch and all the space between then and now that had filled up with something she didn't have a word for yet, but recognized the shape of. How do you know? She said. Because after tomorrow, he said, it won't matter what he says. He paused. One way or another, the record will say what happened, and that's what lasts. She closed the folder. She stood up. She blew out the lamp. "Get some sleep," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And the not-quite smile was there, and she went to bed, and this time she didn't lie awake. The territorial court was in a stone building in the county seat 40 miles from Dust Valley, and they left before sunrise in 2 wagons. Charlotte and Wyatt in the first. Agnes and Edith and Howard Pratt in the second. May Whitfield sitting beside Howard with her best coat on and her hands folded in her lap, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this particular Thursday for 6 years and was not going to dignify the wait by being late. Charlotte had not expected May to come. May had said when Charlotte arrived to pick up Howard, "I'm coming," and when Charlotte started to say that it wasn't necessary, May had said "Charlotte" in the voice that ended conversations, and Charlotte had said, "Get in the wagon." They arrived at 8:15. Wyatt's attorney, a compact, precise man named Gerard Wells, who had taken the stage from Denver and met them at the courthouse. Steps shook Charlotte's hand and then immediately began talking through the filing sequence, which was how she knew he was going to be useful. At 9 o'clock, Nathan Greer arrived. He came with Holt and 2 other men. Charlotte didn't recognize, and he walked into the courthouse with the stride of a man who was furious and was controlling it with significant effort. He saw Charlotte, and he saw Agnes, and he saw Edith Marsh, and Charlotte watched him. See Edith Marsh, watched the recognition move across his face, watched him understand what it meant that all 3 women were standing in this building together. For the first time in 6 years of knowing Nathan Greer by reputation, and 3 weeks of knowing him in fact, Charlotte saw him afraid. It was brief, a flash controlled immediately, but she saw it, and she stored it, and she stood straighter. Holt leaned in and said something in Greer's ear. Greer shook his head once sharply. "He's going to try to settle," Wyatt said quietly beside her. "He can try," Charlotte said. Holt approached them 20 minutes later, before the judge had been seated with the expression of a man performing a distasteful function with professional competence. "Mr. Greer is prepared to withdraw his circuit court filing and the water rights injunction," he said, "in exchange for a mutual agreement that no further legal action will be pursued." Wells looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at Holt. "No," she said. Holt didn't blink. "Miss Parker, Mrs. Foley lost her property in 1878, Charlotte said. Mrs. Marsh lost hers in 1880. Whatever offer Mr. Greer makes to me right now does nothing for them, and nothing for the woman before them, whose record stops in 1880, and whom I cannot find." She held Holt's gaze. "Tell Mr. Greer his offer is declined." Holt looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Wyatt. Then he went back to Greer, and Charlotte watched Greer receive the answer, and watched his face do the thing it had done at the auction, when he'd finally understood he wasn't going to win the particular stillness of a man who has run out of moves. "He's going to fight it anyway," Wyatt said. "I know," Charlotte said. "Let him." The judge's name was Elias Carmody, and he was 67 years old and had been on the territorial bench for 19 years, and he had the specific gravity of a man who had heard every variety of lie and manipulation that property law could produce and had developed a finely calibrated tolerance for exactly none of it. He read the documentation in silence for 22 minutes while the courtroom waited. Charlotte sat at the respondents' table with Wells and Wyatt and Agnes and Edith behind the rail, and she watched Carmody read, and she did not allow herself to interpret his expression, because men like Carmody made their expressions deliberately unreadable, and trying to read them was a way of making yourself crazy. Greer's table was across the aisle. He sat with Holt and his 2 associates, and he did not look at Charlotte. That told her more than his expression would have. When Carmody finished, he set the documents down with a precise alignment that suggested he'd decided something and was organizing his words to match the decision. "Mr. Holt," he said, "your client's deed filing of August 15th was based on an auction proceeding that the county attorney has already ruled improper. Your circuit court challenge of that ruling is before me today. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Holt said, "and the county attorney's basis for ruling the auction improper was a documented parcel number discrepancy in the county tax records." Carmody looked at the papers. "The discrepancy is also documented in the Denver County Clerk's archive in the original taxpayer filing." He paused. "Do you dispute the existence of this discrepancy?" A pause. "No, Your Honor." Do you dispute that the discrepancy reduced Miss Parker's documented tax arrearage below the mandatory threshold for forced auction? Longer pause. We dispute the materiality of Mr. Holt, Carmody said with the patience of a man who had heard this particular construction before and found it tedious. The threshold is fixed by statute. Either the arrearage meets it or it does not. The documentation indicates it does not. Do you have documentation to the contrary? Holt did not. Carmody looked at the second set of documents. Agnes's records, Edith's locked box collection, Wyatt's pattern analysis. He looked at them for a long time. Mr. Wells, he said, your filing alleges a systematic pattern of county record manipulation affecting multiple properties across a period of at least 5 years. The documentation submitted includes evidence of consistent parcel number misfilings that in each case benefited the same acquiring party. He paused. And you've identified the handwriting of a specific county banking official in at least one of the misfiled records. Yes, Your Honor, Wells said. I'm going to ask Mr. Greer a direct question, Carmody said. He turned to the other table. Mr. Greer, did you have prior knowledge of the parcel number discrepancy in Miss Parker's tax record before the auction of August 14th? The courtroom was absolutely still. Greer looked at Carmody. He looked at Holt. Holt's face was doing something careful and controlled. Greer started. Before you answer, Carmody said, I want to be clear that the penalty for perjury in a territorial court proceeding is considerably more unpleasant than the penalty for whatever answer I'm about to hear. He looked at Greer over his glasses with the specific patience of a man who had been doing this for 19 years and was not in a hurry. Mr. Greer, I was aware of a question regarding the accuracy of the tax record, Greer said, and the words came out measured and careful. The words of a man who had just made a decision about the smallest possible truth he could offer. Carmody looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Hollis Crane, who was sitting in the gallery and who had gone the color of old ash. I see, Carmody said. What came next was not dramatic. That was the thing Charlotte had not expected. She had braced for a fight for Holt's professional maneuvering and Greer's controlled fury and the long grinding machinery of law being applied against her. What she got instead was something quieter and more devastating. A judge who had done the math before anyone sat down and was now simply reading the conclusion aloud. Carmody ruled the circuit court challenge dismissed. He ruled the Greer deed invalid. He reinstated the Larkspur title to Charlotte Evelyn Parker in full, with the water rights attached and uncontested. He ordered the water rights injunction vacated. Then he looked at Hollis Crane and said that the Territorial Banking Commission would be receiving a referral regarding the conduct of the Dust Valley Savings and Loan, and that Crane would want to have very good legal representation available in the coming weeks. Then he looked at Greer and said, Mr. Greer, the properties of Agnes Foley and Edith Marsh were acquired under circumstances that this court finds consistent with the fraudulent pattern documented in today's filing. The Territorial Prosecutor's Office will receive a copy of this record. I'd suggest you spend the weekend with your attorney. Holt's face had gone completely still. Greer's had not. There was something working in it, something that was not quite the fear she'd seen before the session, but was its aftermath. The expression of a man who had been very powerful for a very long time and was now standing in the specific moment where power runs out. He looked at Charlotte. She looked back. She did not feel triumph exactly. She felt the weight of it, the real weight, the weight of 6 years and 4 women and 1 woman she couldn't find, and 31 years of being told that what she was worth was determined by factors she hadn't chosen. She felt the full mass of it, and she held it, and she did not look away from Nathan Greer until he looked away first. He looked away first. Outside the courthouse, in the full August heat, May Whitfield put her arms around Charlotte and held on with the particular strength of a 64-year-old woman who had been waiting a long time to do this specific thing. Charlotte let herself be held. She was not normally a woman who let herself be held. She made an exception. Agnes Foley shook Wells's hand and said, "What about our land?" And Wells said, "The territorial prosecutor's case will include restitution claims. I can't promise the outcome, but I can tell you the documentation is as strong as I've seen." Agnes nodded once and turned away, and Charlotte could see her deciding what to do with Hope, which was the same work Charlotte had been doing for weeks. Edith Marsh stood a little apart, looking at nothing in particular, and Charlotte went to her and stood beside her and didn't say anything for a moment. "Will we get it back?" Edith said. She asked it quietly without drama, the way women ask questions they've been carrying for years, not urgently, because the urgency has burned off, and what's left is just the question, plain and persistent. "I don't know," Charlotte said. "Wells thinks the restitution case is strong. Carmody's referral gives the prosecutor grounds." She paused. "But I can't promise you." Edith was quiet. "No," she said. "I know you can't." She turned and looked at Charlotte. "But you found us." Charlotte held her gaze. "You were always findable," she said. "Someone just had to look." Howard Pratt was shaking Wells's hand and saying something about the county attorney's office that sounded like a man making plans. May was talking to Agnes with her arm around Agnes's shoulders, in the particular May way of making people feel that they had always been known. The horses were at the post. Gerald was at the post, with the expression of a creature who considered his transportation contribution to today's events insufficiently acknowledged. Wyatt was at the edge of it. Howe was standing slightly apart, hat in his hands, watching all of it with the quiet attention she had first noticed in the auction square, taking inventory. Not with anxiety, but with the steady habit of someone making sure everyone was accounted for. When she moved toward him, he turned, and the look on his face was something she had never seen on him before. Not the controlled steadiness, not the flat professional precision. Something underneath it. Something that had been there for a while and was not being managed at the moment. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. "Charlotte, Wyatt." She stopped in front of him. She looked at him directly in the way she'd been learning to look at things she didn't deflect from anymore. "I have something to say, and I'm going to say it here because I've learned that waiting for the right moment is a way of never saying things, and I'm finished with that." He held very still. "You came here for a clerical error," she said, "and you stayed because you wanted to. You told me that, and I believed you, and I believe you still." She paused. "I am not an easy woman. I have opinions about everything, and I keep records, and I do not apologize for the space I require physically or otherwise, and I never will." She held his gaze. "I need you to know that going in." "I know it," he said. "I need you to know it the way you know the fence line work," she said. "Not as an idea, as a fact you've worked with your hands." "Charlotte," he said, and his voice had the quality it got when he was saying something he meant all the way down. "I have worked beside you, and eaten at your table, and watched you walk into a bank and a courtroom and a county attorney's office without flinching. I know exactly what kind of woman you are." He paused. "I came here because a record was wrong. I stayed because you're the first person in 8 years who made me want to stop moving." She looked at him. The August heat was on both of them, and the courthouse was behind them, and May was watching from approximately 12 feet away, with absolutely no pretense of not watching, and none of that mattered. "Then stop moving," Charlotte said. He reached out and took her hand. Both of them looked at this for a moment, her hand in his, the work-roughened reality of two people who had fixed fence posts together, and then he looked up at her and said, "I'd like to ask you something." "Then ask me," she said. He was quiet for just a moment, not hesitation. The pause of a man making sure the words were right before he said them. "Charlotte Evelyn Parker," he said, "you are the most stubborn, most organized, most entirely remarkable woman I have ever had the privilege of standing next to. I spent 8 years moving between places looking for something I couldn't name, and I found it on 212 acres in Dust Valley, with a mule who has opinions and a fence line that needed fixing." He held her gaze. "Will you let me stay permanently? As your husband, if you'll have me. As the man who wakes up every morning in a place that's actually home." May made a sound from 12 feet away. Howard Pratt said something to May that Charlotte didn't catch. Charlotte looked at Wyatt Cole, at his steady hands, and his careful eyes, and the gray at his temples, and the tiredness that had been slowly resolving over the past 3 weeks into something that looked less like exhaustion and more like a man arriving somewhere after a very long journey. "You'll need to learn Gerald's preferences," she said. "Carrots," he said. "I've got it. "And I keep the accounts," she said. "I'm better at it." "I know you are," he said. "And the fence is my father's design," she said. "We maintain it the way he built it." "I wouldn't change a post," he said. She felt the smile come up in her before she could be careful about it. Not the small managed expression she used in public. The real one. The one her mother used to say, lit up the room, which Charlotte had always thought was an exaggeration, and which she had never quite believed, because nobody had ever looked at her the right way when she wore it. Wyatt was looking at her the right way. "Yes," she said. "I'll have you." He brought her hand up and held it against his chest for a moment, and she could feel his heartbeat under her palm, steady and real, and May was definitely crying behind them. And Howard Pratt said something that sounded like "finally." And Charlotte stood in the August sun outside the territorial courthouse and let herself feel the full size of the thing she'd said yes to, without reducing it to anything more manageable. They were married in October on the Larkspur, in the yard between the house and the barn, with May Whitfield and Howard Pratt, and Agnes Foley and Edith Marsh as witnesses, and Gerald standing at the fence line, with the expression of a creature who considered himself an essential part of the proceedings. The minister was a man named Calloway, who had performed 3 funerals in Dust Valley and was clearly more comfortable with them, but who managed the ceremony with sufficient dignity that Charlotte did not hold his nerves against him. She wore her mother's brooch on a dress she'd made herself, and Wyatt wore his good coat and his clean boots, and looked at her during the vows with an attention so complete and so unguarded that Charlotte, who had not cried in a county attorney's office or a territorial courtroom, had to work harder than she expected, not to cry at her own wedding. She did not cry. She held his gaze and said the words clearly and felt each one settle. The territorial prosecutor's case against Nathan Greer and Hollis Crane had been filed the week before. Agnes Foley's land was the subject of a restitution claim that Wells said had good grounds. Edith Marsh's case was more complex, more years, more layers, but Carmody's referral had given it weight that the Carlisle lawyer in 1882 had not been able to provide. The fourth woman, the one whose record stopped in 1880, remained unfound. Charlotte had hired a man in Denver to look. She did not intend to stop looking. Nathan Greer had not been seen on the county road that ran past the Larkspur since September. Hollis Crane had resigned from the bank. Del Forsyth, the county attorney, had sent Charlotte a formal letter of apology that was stiff and imperfect and genuine, and she had filed it in the tin box alongside her father's receipts, because she had learned from her father that records were a form of dignity, and every piece of the truth deserved to be kept. At the reception, such as it was, which was May's cooking, and Howard's whiskey, and Agnes playing a fiddle that she'd brought without being asked, May said to Charlotte quietly, "Your mother would have liked him." Charlotte looked across the yard to where Wyatt was standing with Howard and Agnes, listening to Howard tell a story about the 1877 water rights dispute, with the specific patience of a man who had decided that patience was his permanent condition at Howard Pratt Stories. And there was something in the set of his shoulders that she recognized as the particular ease of a person who had arrived somewhere and known it was right. "I know," Charlotte said. She had good judgment. "So do you," May said. "I had to think about it," Charlotte said. "The best decisions usually need thinking," May said. "It's the foolish ones that come fast." Later, when the guests had gone and the yard was quiet and the October stars were out in their autumn arrangements, Charlotte and Wyatt sat on the porch steps, the way they'd sat on the porch all those August evenings, shoulder to shoulder, easy with the silence. The Larkspur lay around them in the dark. She could hear the creek. She could feel the fence line at the edge of perception, not see it, not in this light, but know it was there, the way you know the bones of a place you love in your body, not your eyes. "You're thinking loudly again," Wyatt said. "I'm thinking about the fourth woman," she said. "The one we haven't found." "Paxton's still looking," he said. "The man in Denver. He'll find a lead. And if she can't get her land back, then she'll know someone looked," he said. "Edith said it. That matters." Charlotte leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. It was a simple thing. 2 people on a porch the evening around them, the ordinary goodness of not being alone. And she let it be simple because she had learned over the last 3 months that the large things were easier to hold when you let the simple ones be what they were. "I want to put a new post at the creek bend," she said. "The cedar one we set in August is good, but the second one north of it is going to shift before spring." "I saw that," he said. "We can do it Saturday." "Before the ground freezes," she said. "Before the ground freezes," he agreed. She looked out at the dark, at the land that had been her father's and her mother's and hers through $11 and a mule, and 31 years of being told she wasn't enough, and deciding that was incorrect. Her through a Denver archive, and a man who had ridden a long distance because a record was wrong and it bothered him. Hers through Agnes Foley's letter, and Edith Marsh's locked box, and May Whitfield's cooking, and Howard Pratt's $40, and Gerald's deep conviction that his participation in everything was mandatory. Hers through the fence line, complete taut post deep and holding. She thought about what her father had said. A fence isn't to keep people out, it's to know where you stand. She knew where she stood. She stood on her own land in her own life, beside a man who had looked at her and seen her clearly, and stayed. And the creek ran in the dark below the east field, and her mother's brooch was pinned at her collar, and every record in the tin box was correct and accounted for, and tomorrow the work would begin again. The way work always began quietly at first light, with the understanding that the doing of it was the whole point. Charlotte Parker had never needed a man to rescue her. She had needed exactly what she had, a person willing to stand on the same ground, work the same fence, and call the same patch of earth home. That was not a small thing. That was, in fact, everything. And the larkspur held them both solid and unhurried and permanent, as good cedar driven deep, the way the best things hold, not by force, not by luck, but by the stubborn, patient insistence of two people who had both been broken in their particular ways, and had found in each other, and in this land, something worth the work of being repaired.